All right, we're ready to get our wireframe from Illustrator over into Photoshop. Now, of course, there's always more than one way to pull this off. What we could do, if we wanted to, is we could select all of the Illustrator content simply by hitting Control or Command A on our keyboard to grab everything inside the wireframe file here, and then we could copy it and paste it over into a new Photoshop file. The million-dollar question, of course, is how do we know what dimensions the new Photoshop file should be? Well, here's a really cool trick for you. Our layout happens to span the entire width of the artboard there, and it also spans the entire height of the artboard. The footer sits way down at the bottom of the artboard, and the header, of course, sits all the way up at the top of the artboard. So check this out. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Control or Command A on my keyboard, and then what I'll do is I'll flip into my transform panel, either the actual panel itself or the transform drop-down from the options bar here at the top. And there's the dimensions of our wireframe document, 750 by 1857 for myself anyway. Okay, so what I would do is I would copy everything. Then I would head over into Photoshop and I would choose File, New, and I would set up the Photoshop file to be the exact same dimensions that I see here inside Illustrator. In any regard, this is one option, not the option that I want to make use of, though. I want Photoshop to do all the heavy lifting for me. So what I'm going to do here instead, this is the option that I'm going to go with, is I'm going to close out of this file here inside Illustrator, Control or Command W. And then what I'll do is I'll head over to Photoshop, which of course I still have running in the background, and I'm going to open up the Illustrator file directly. Okay, so double-clicking on the gray background there inside Photoshop or File Open, and I'm going to go and look for Medium Resolution Wireframe.ai. Go ahead and grab this guy and open him up. Okay, this is exactly what we did earlier on with our high-resolution wireframe, as I'm sure you recall. All right, now, inside this dialog box, just double-check that your unit of measurement there on the right-hand side is indeed set to pixels. And then I'm going to use the same width that we just saw a moment ago inside Illustrator, inside our wireframe file, which was 750. Okay? And because I have constrained proportions activated or turned on inside the dialog box, the height automatically resets itself or adjusts itself. Perfect. So in other words, I'm getting Photoshop to do all the work here. Okay? Go ahead and click on OK. And of course, there's our wireframe now inside Photoshop. Okay. Now, the only drawback to going this route as opposed to copying and pasting from Illustrator is if I zoom in on my document, give me just a second, I'm going to zoom way in, what I wind up seeing are pixels, right? So we wind up getting pixels here inside Photoshop. If I were to copy and paste from Illustrator, I'd have the option, of course, of pasting as pixels or pasting as a smart object. So you do have that extra option there. So in any regard, there we go. There's our wireframe. The last thing I'm going to do here before we move on is I'm going to save this guy up. So I'm just going to choose File, Save As. There we go. And I'm just going to call this guy medium resolution.psd. Of course, I'm saving this into my work files folder. Make sure, by the way, that your format menu is set to Photoshop. We do want to make sure to save this guy as a .psd. And that's all there is to it. Go ahead and click on Save. And then if you get this compatibility dialog box coming up, go ahead and click on OK one more time. There we go. All right, we have our medium resolution wireframe opened up inside Photoshop. Of course, now what we want to do is we want to break apart the wireframe inside Photoshop across multiple layers, of course, inside the Layers panel. So I have my Layers panel handy there on the right-hand side. You might want to set yourself up in a similar way. Now, I hope this is okay with you. We've already done this once with the high-resolution layout, right? So we've already seen this stuff. So if it's okay with you, I'd like to move a little bit quicker. I hope that's all right. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go after the header right off the bat here. Now, do you remember how we extracted the header from the wireframe earlier on with the high resolution layout? We had used the marquee tool, the rectangular marquee tool, and that's exactly what I'm going to do here. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this guy. And if you recall, what I wound up doing is I wound up setting the style from the options menu to a fixed size. And previously, see, Photoshop remembers my last settings here, I had used 960 by 130. So what I could do is I could go 750, because that's the width of my layout now, 750 by 130. That's perfectly fine. However, in the spirit of variety, what I'll do here is I'll show you a different option that we can make use of here. You're more than welcome to use the fixed size. That's perfectly fine if you want to do that. Instead, what I'm going to do, I'm still going to use my rectangular marquee tool, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and grab my info panel from the window menu. So choose window and then info. And what I'll do is I'll just kind of tear this guy away so we can keep this guy kind of kicking around. And how this guy works is as I click and drag out, it's going to tell me the size of the current selection, right? But notice it's giving me a decimal place, which is no good. It's because we're in inches right now. So give me a moment here. I'm going to head up to the Photoshop menu, or if you're on the Windows side, head to the Edit menu, and then head down to Preferences, and then look for units and rulers, okay? And what I want to do is I want to make sure that my rulers are set to pixels because we're talking web design here, right? All right, good enough. Go ahead and click on OK. And now I'm getting pixels inside the info panel beside the W and the H, width and height. That's exactly what we want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start clicking and dragging out a rectangle here with my marquee tool, but I'm going to keep my eyeballs down here in this area inside the info panel to make sure that I do indeed get a rectangle that's 750 pixels in width and 130 pixels in height. Okay, so the 750 is easy because that's the overall width of the document. So it's really just the height of 130 that we're after. And there we go, just like that, 750 by 130. Okay, now you don't have to do it this way. I'm just showing you something that's kind of neat, kind of cool. But anyway, there we go. So this is another way to go about creating your selections, okay? Accurate or precise selections. I'm going to head to the layer menu now, and then down to new, and then down to layer via cut. Okay, and of course, there's our keyboard shortcut from earlier that we saw. Okay, so there's layer 2, which now contains the header. Okay, so I'm going to rename this guy, you guessed it, header, just like that. There we go. There's our header. Now we just have the rest of the wireframe. But again, as I mentioned earlier on, I'd like to move a little bit faster if that's all right with you. Let's continue breaking apart our wireframe here. This method that I had shown you in the previous exercise using the info panel with the rectangular marquee tool, that's just one option, one kind of neat thing that I thought I'd bounce off you. But anyway, you don't have to make use of that if you didn't like that. What I'm going to do next, I'm just going to pan down here. Inside the layers panel, I'm going to go and grab layer 1 because layer 1 contains the rest of the wireframe, right? So we've only isolated just the header away from the wireframe. So make sure you have that layer 1 selected inside the layers panel. Let's go after the menu next. And I had shown you this technique earlier on. This is one method that I make use of quite a bit. I make kind of a sloppy selection, just something like this. I know that I've got the menu in there somewhere, but I'm not being very precise trying to make sure that I grab it, perfectly, right across, something like this. I just kind of throw a selection down, something like this, a selection that's big enough to contain the entire navigation menu, just like that, right? I don't really care that I have empty pixels above and below or anything like that. I'm really kind of doing this almost in a haphazard way, right? With that selection created, and of course with layer 1 selected, I'm going to hit my favorite keyboard shortcut, one of my favorite keyboard shortcuts, Command-Shift-J, or Control-Shift-J there on the Windows side. And that, of course, takes any pixels that resided inside my selection and moves them to a new layer inside the layers panel. Okay, just like that. And we can call this guy nav menu or navigation menu or whatever you like there. Okay, perfect. As a matter of fact, we can continue on this theme of reckless selections inside Photoshop by doing exactly the same with the slideshow placeholder, this guy right here. So I could create sort of a rough selection like this. I'm not being very careful at all. I'm just double checking that I have the correct layer selected inside the layers panel. And then again, layer new and then layer via cut or Command-Shift-J or Control-Shift-J on your keyboard to go and pull that guy out of the wireframe, out of layer 1, and isolate them onto a brand new layer inside the layers panel. Okay, so there we go. Nice and easy. All right, now for the sake of time, and I hope this is all right with you, if I zoom all the way out here, Controller Command 0 on my keyboard, we only have our 3 content boxes, the news feed, and the footer left. And I'd really like to wrap it up in this exercise and move on to the exciting world of design, or the exciting subject of design. So I think what I'll do for these guys, you could continue using your marquee tool here, your rectangular marquee tool, and making these sort of, reckless selections, as I called them in the previous exercise. Or we could use the magic wand trick. So inside your toolbox there, you could go and grab your magic wand tool, and you could go about creating your selections this way as well. That would be perfectly fine. It doesn't really matter. Just make sure you have the correct layer selected inside the layers panel before you start creating selections and yanking them out of the wireframe and things like this. Okay, so I'm going to make sure that layer 1 is selected. I'll grab the first content box, Command-Shift-J, there he is. I hope it's all right. I'm just going to zip through this here. Content box 1, and I'm zipping through it again because we've already seen this with the high resolution layout, right? Back to layer 1, I'll click on the next content box, Command-Shift-J or Control-Shift-J on my keyboard, renaming as I go, and that was a habit that I had to get into many years back. I wouldn't bother naming my layers, and then of course I'd get myself completely lost and turned around in my own files, which is somewhat embarrassing. In any regard, we're almost done here. I'm going to go and grab my footer way down at the bottom and pull him out, Command-Shift-J or Control-Shift-J, and we'll call this guy footer. And then last but not least, this is just the news feed that's left, right? So of course, I'm going to rename this guy news feed. There we are. And I think what I'll do as well is, well, first of all, I'm going to move my news feed above the footer, just so everything's in order there. And let's see, I'm going to create a brand new blank layer from the bottom of the layers panel. And I'll move this guy all the way down to the bottom, and I'll rename him to background. And of course, I'll go and fill him with solid white. Do you remember your keyboard shortcut for this? Make sure that you have white set as your background color down at the bottom of the toolbox. And then hit Control or Command Delete or Backspace on your keyboard. And that will fill the selected layer with the background color. Perfect. Go ahead and save up your file. And now we are ready to move on to the wonderful subject of design. All right, now, as I had alluded to earlier, I think this process is going to go a lot faster. We've already laid out the design once for the high resolution. So now what we want to do is we want to apply that design, which we've already created, to the medium resolution wireframe, the broken apart medium resolution wireframe. So as you can see, I've gone and opened up the high resolution.psd, and I'd like you to do the same. Go ahead and choose File Open and open up your high resolution.psd. What we're going to do is we're going to take a lot of the content, much of the content that we've created here inside the high resolution layout, and we're going to apply it to the medium resolution wireframe or the medium resolution design. Okay? Hence why I say that this is going to go a lot faster than it did previously. So I think the way that I'm going to arrange things, at least for myself, is I want to be able to see both files, both designs at the same time. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to head up to my window menu and then down to Arrange, and then I'm going to choose Float All in Windows. And essentially what that will do is it'll allow me to see both files simultaneously. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to sort of do a side-by-side here. This could get a little bit tricky with, so many floating windows and the layers panel kind of kicking around there and so on. But we'll do our best here. We'll see how this goes. I'm going to make sure that the medium resolution file is in focus. He's on top. And once again, I'm going to take a top-down approach. So I'm going to start with his header. Okay, so there's the header there inside my layout. You can see. I'll zoom in just a little bit here on the medium resolution layout so we can take a closer look at this here. But again, it could get a little bit tricky with so many floating windows. So there's the header. I want to get the logo in there. I want to set his background color and so on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and set the background color or the color overlay first, by, once again, simply double-clicking on the right-hand side of the header layer. This is inside the medium resolution file, of course, into the layer style dialog box. And of course, I'm going to go and look for color overlay, and we'll change his color by clicking on the color swatch to blue. Now, do you remember the RGB color values that we used for our blue? Neither do I. So what we'll do is we'll simply bring our cursor over top of the high resolution layout, over top of a blue area. It doesn't matter which blue area, so long as you're over top of one of the blue areas inside the high resolution layout, and we can sample that same blue color. Okay, just like so. All right, perfect, good stuff. Go ahead and click on OK, and then OK one more time. All right, good stuff. So there's the layer effect, the color overlay applied to the header layer, which is great. Okay. All right. Now, for the logo, once again, the logo's already been set up. We already set that guy up in Illustrator way back when, so we don't have to go through all those steps again. It's already set up for us if I zoom in on the high-resolution layout here. So what I want to do is I want to find the logo inside the high-resolution file. He's inside the Layers panel, of course. So what I've done here is I've flipped over to the high-resolution file, the high-resolution layout. I'm going to twist open his header layer group. Of course, we have everything set up here in layer groups, and there's the logo right there, okay? And all I'm going to do is I'm going to take the logo and simply drag and drop it into the medium resolution file, okay? Nice and easy. Again, everything's already set up here, so there's no sense in rebuilding everything from scratch. I already have my move tool selected inside the toolbox, the black arrow tool here inside Photoshop, so that guy is going to allow me to very simply reposition the logo inside my layout. I'm just using my arrow keys to go and micro-position this guy. Something like that I think is going to be just fine. I might use my free transform to maybe scale this guy down a little bit. Control or Command T and then holding down Shift and just pulling on one of the corners there and then Enter to lock that in. Something like that. You can fiddle around with that if you like. Get that guy positioned in. And then, of course, last but not least, we will take the logo and the header. We'll select both of them by holding down either Shift or Control or Command, grabbing both of them, and then we'll save them or move them into a layer group by hitting Control or Command G. Okay, just like we've done a number of times already. And I'll call this guy header or header area or something like that. Perfect. There's the header for the medium resolution layout. With the medium resolution layout's header now complete, let's go after the main navigation menu for the medium resolution. So this guy we're going to use a black color overlay on. So once again, double clicking on his right-hand side, into the layer style dialog box and color overlay. If you want, for this guy, after I click on his color swatch, you could go and sample black out of the high resolution layout there if you wanted to, or you can just set black. I mean, that's an easy setting there, so you can go and do that. And then click on OK twice. There we go. Perfect. For our main navigation menu. Now, the main navigation menu, of course, if I flip over to the high resolution layout, has all of the text in there as well. Now, I don't know about you, but I really don't feel like typing all that text out again, all those menu items. We've already done it once, so once again, there's really no sense in redoing everything here. So what I'm going to do here inside the high resolution file is I'm going to go and find that text. Once again, he's buried inside the layers panel somewhere. So let's go and find him. I'm going to twist shut the header area layer group, and I'll twist open my navigation menu, layer group, and there he is right there, the text layer that we see in there, okay? So what I'm going to do, just like we did with our logo, is I'm going to grab this guy and drag and drop him into the medium resolution layout, just like so. And when I do the drag and drop, by the way, I'm really not being careful. I just kind of toss it in there and then worry about getting it all positioned up and looking nice after I get the content into the file, okay? So I'm just going to reposition this guy. I'm still on my move tool from the previous exercise, so I can just click and drag on that content and reposition him. Now this text is going to be a little bit too long for our overall width of our layout here. So give me a second. I'm just trying to stretch things out here a little bit. what we could do is, well, I could grab my type tool and I could click inside this text and we could start monkeying around with font sizes to try and guess what font size we should wind up using. Or for me, the down and dirty method is just using free transform. It's fast, it's visual, it's nice and easy. So inside the layers panel, I still have that type layer, the new type layer selected. So I'm just going to hit Control-Command-T on my keyboard. There's the free transform frame. I was hoping to be able to grab the right edge of the frame, but again, I don't know if I'll be able to. Oh, there we are. Good stuff. I wasn't sure I'd be able to actually, fit it all on screen here with so many floating boxes and so on. And once again, I'm really not being precise here. Maybe I should be a little bit more precise, but I'm just trying to get the basic idea in here. If I zoom all the way into 100%, Control-Command-1, by the way, that looks pretty darn good to me, something like that. Okay, so there you go. There's the main navigation menu done in a matter of minutes. Nice and easy. So again, I really don't want to be recreating anything or rebuilding anything that's already been created for us, or that you and I have already built, I should say. All right, I'm going to grab my two layers there, the text layer that contains the menu items and the nav menu itself. You guessed it, Control-Command-G on my keyboard, and then we can call this nav menu or navigation menu or whatever the heck you like. Whatever's going to help you remember what's inside this layer group. Okay, good stuff. Now it's on to the slideshow. Okay, our slideshow. Now, if you'll recall from way back when, if I go back to the high resolution layout for just a moment, the slideshow was created with a clipping group. I'm sure you remember all of that. So the photograph that we have here inside our slideshow object is actually being clipped to the dimensions of that slideshow object. So we're going to have to essentially rebuild that for ourselves here. Okay, so a couple of things that I want to make sure of, first of all, before we move ahead. Back to the medium resolution layout for just a moment, if you would. Make sure that your slideshow layer inside the layers panel is selected. Okay, because we're going to move the photograph over into the medium resolution file in just a second. And we want to make sure that the new layer, the photograph, gets dropped on top of the slideshow object. So just make sure you have your slideshow layer, your slideshow object selected there. And then I'm going to head back to the high resolution layout. I'm going to collapse or close the navigation menu layer group, and I'll twist open the slideshow layer group. Now, what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to grab the slideshow and drag and drop it. That's the wireframe object, don't forget. What I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the photo itself. Okay, so grab the photo layer there. You may have renamed yours as I did. And what I'm going to do is drag and drop him into the medium resolution layout, something like this. Okay. Now, once again, when you do the initial drag and drop, it's going to be somewhat messy. Okay, so we're going to have to do a little bit of fiddling here. And give me a moment to fiddle with my screen so we can see exactly what's going on here. There we go. So this photo is huge inside my medium resolution layout. So let's try and fix this up a little bit. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to create the clipping group, and then what we'll do, if necessary, is we'll resize the photo, scale the photo a little bit using free transform. Okay? So back to my layers panel. Inside my medium resolution file, there's the photo, there's the slideshow layer. That came in perfectly. I'm going to hold down Alt or Option, and I'll click between the two layers, of course, to create the clipping group for myself. There we are, something like this. And then what I'll do is I'll make sure that the photo layer is still selected inside the layers panel, and I'll use my free transform, Control-Command-T, of course. There we go. And I'm going to do some scaling and some repositioning, and hopefully I'll be able to get this guy looking somewhat decent, although it could be a little bit tricky to get all this sort of positioned and looking half decent. Maybe something like that is okay for our purposes here. Something like that I think is fine. I'll go ahead and hit Enter on my keyboard. There you go. That's all there is to it. Again, we've already built the slideshow, so we're just reusing content from the previous layout, the previous design. I'm going to grab both of my layers related to the slideshow, of course, inside the layers panel, Control-Command-G on my keyboard, and we'll group these guys together, and we'll call that group slideshow. things are moving along nice and quick here. I hope you don't mind this somewhat accelerated pace. I didn't want to drag you through the entire design from scratch all over again. We've already built it all. Now, things are going to get a little bit more complex now because what we're going to go after are the 3 content boxes. So that's these 3 boxes here inside the high resolution layout, the experience, tickets and rates, and our location. And of course, what we decided to do for the medium resolution layout is we decided to change the layout. So now the 3 content boxes appear stacked on top of one another rather than appearing horizontally across the layout. So it's going to be a little bit more involved, but it's actually not too difficult. What we're going to do here to get ourselves started is we'll begin by setting the color overlay for the first content box. Okay? So I'm going to grab content box 1, the layer content box 1 that is, inside the layers panel. Let's go and set his color overlay. Now, what we could do, this actually gives me an opportunity to show you something kind of cool. What we could do is we could do exactly what we've done all the way along. We could double click on the right-hand side and then go down to color overlay and so on to set the layer style, right? Here's a neat little trick that I've been looking for an excuse to show you this trick. This is pretty cool. I'm actually going to go back to the header layer group for a moment. And I'm going to grab the header layer itself, which of course contains the color overlay effect. What I can actually do is I can take a layer effect and I can copy the layer effect, just like you and I would copy text. And then we can paste that layer effect onto other layers. It's pretty cool stuff. Check this out. It's really easy. I'm going to take my header layer. I'm going to right click on them. And then what I'll do is I'll choose copy layer style, just like that from the contextual menu that appears. And then I'll twist shut the header layer group. I'll go back down to content box 1. I'll right click on him and then I'll choose paste layer style from the contextual menu that appears. And voila, the exact same layer effect or layer style gets applied to content box 1. Pretty cool. The blue color overlay. There you go. That's all there is to it. Pretty cool trick. All right. Now, more importantly, we have some content inside the high resolution layout that needs to wind up inside the medium resolution layout. Okay, so make sure that you still have your content box 1 layer selected. Make sure you haven't moved away from there. I'm just going to shove this guy over towards the right-hand side of my screen for a moment here and get into my high resolution layout. Here's what I'm going to do. We're going to try and make this as simple as possible. Obviously, there's quite a bit of content that has to come across here. Inside the high resolution files layers panel, if that makes sense, I'm going to twist shut the slideshow. And I'll twist open the content box 1 layer group. And there's a bunch of content that I want to bring over, of course. We have the placeholder text, the lorem ipsum text. We have the photograph, Emily Dickinson. And we also have the title for the content box, The Experience, which is set as a vector smart object. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to grab the vector smart object. I'm going to hold down Control or Command. And I'm also going to grab the photograph, in my case, Emily Dickinson. Okay, so I'm grabbing both layers, and I'm going to simultaneously move both layers into the medium resolution layout by dragging both of them into the medium resolution file, just like this, and they both come across. There they are inside the layers panel. Okay, and then once again, because I still have my move tool selected, I'll simply reposition these guys, something like this. So let me pull this guy over so we can have a closer look. Maybe something like this. And I'm going to have to decide here. Maybe I want the photo to be a little bit bigger or perhaps a little bit smaller, or maybe I want the title text there, the experience to sort of hang off the top edge of the blue box. I don't know. I'm going to have to fiddle with that. But what I want is something like this, I should think. All right, good stuff. Now, I still need the placeholder text. So we could go back to our work files folder and open up the placeholder text file, lorem ipsum, and we could copy it and paste it in like we did before. Or what we could do alternatively is I could go back to the high resolution file and I could grab the placeholder text here, this guy right here, and I could drag and drop him over into the medium resolution file, something like this. Okay, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. Just drag and drop that text layer into the medium resolution file. Okay. Now, obviously, we have to do some resizing here as well. This does get a little bit tricky to resize this guy, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tap my T key on my keyboard to flip me over to my type tool. And then I'll single click inside my text. And when I click inside my text, I'll be given these grab handles here, which I can use to resize and scale and adjust my text frame. Perhaps something like this. So you might have to fiddle for a moment to really get this happening for yourself. And don't be bothered if it takes you a couple of attempts to really get this looking half decent. But I think I'm going to wind up with something like this. I think this is going to suit our purposes here. All right, good stuff. I'm going to finish off by creating my layer group inside the layers panel. We have a bunch of layers here to go. So we have the Lorem Ipsum layer. I'm going to hold down Controller Command and then grab the Smart Object layer, the Emily Dickinson layer with the layer effect applied to it, by the way, still applied to that photograph that we have, the white stroke there applied to that guy, and then the content box itself as well. So there's 4 layers to go here. Controller Command G, and then I'll call this Content Box 1. There we go. Well, we have the first of the 3 content boxes set up here inside the medium resolution design, which is wonderful. But we have 2 more to go here. Let's try and get the last 2 done both simultaneously, all in one shot. I think we can pull it off here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off by selecting Content Box 2 inside the Layers panel. I'm going to right-click on this guy, and lo and behold, I can still paste the layer style that you and I had copied earlier. Now that's going to save some time, and I'm going to do that for Content Box 3 as well. May as well get them both done there. And let's see, let's go after the titles and the imagery for the last 2 content boxes as well. So I'm going to go back to Content Box 2 because I want the content that I'm about to drop into this file to appear on top of the Content Box 2 layer. Let me move this guy out of the way for a second here. It's going to be tickets and rates this time. So once again, I've got to do a little bit of digging here. I've got to twist shut Content Box 1 and twist open Content Box 2. And let's see, there's the photo and there's the smart object there. You want to be careful, though, that you're grabbing the right objects here. Oh, we had used a clipping group here with the effect applied to the photo box itself. So we're actually going to have to bring over 3 layers in this case. I'd forgotten about this. So I'm going to grab the cookie cutter layer, if you will, with the layer effect applied to them, plus the Flickr user Kwanja's photo there. That's the photo right there. And then also the vector smart object, the title, text, tickets, and rates. So all 3 layers are going to have to come over. I'm going to drag and drop them in here. This could get a little bit complicated, but hopefully we'll do okay. So long as all 3 layers are selected here inside the layers panel, I can move all 3 around simultaneously. Perhaps something like this, right? And all I'm trying to do here is just sort of visually line it up with the left edge of the photo just above it there for the experience. Perhaps something like that. There we go. All right. That looks pretty good. Now, as far as the Lorem Ipsum text goes, I could drop over the Lorem Ipsum text again and then resize it. Although we have the sized Lorem Ipsum text just above, so why don't we just copy that instead? So what I'll do here is I'll twist open the Content Box 1 layer group, grab his Lorem Ipsum layer, text layer, and I'm going to drag that layer down to the new layer icon at the bottom of the layers panel to duplicate the layer. And then what I'll have to do is take the duplicate and drag him outside of the Content Box 1 layer group. Okay? So in other words, all the way down just above the smart object beneath it. Something like that. Okay? And then if I twist shut my Content Box 1 layer group, looks like I didn't pull them out of the, there we go. I had to pull them out of the layer group. There we go. I didn't get them out of there, something like that. That's what we want. And I still have my move tool selected as always inside the toolbox. So I'm just going to click and drag down the duplicate. I'm holding down shift to lock this guy into the nearest 45-degree angle there, perfectly straight, something like that. All right, now let's see. I'm going to, since I'm at it, I'm going to duplicate out the Lorem Ipsum text one more time. I'm still on my Move tool. I still have the Lorem Ipsum text layer selected inside the Layers panel. So I'm going to hold down Alt or Option and then click and drag down to the third content box, throwing in Shift to make sure that my duplicate remains nice and lined up there. So holding down Alt or Option and clicking and dragging allows you to duplicate a layer, which is great. So let's see here. I'm going to take the duplicate type layer there inside the Layers panel, and I'm going to drag and drop him all the way down just above content box. It would be content box 3 right there. Okay, perfect. It's starting to get a little bit confusing because we have so many layers happening here inside the Layers panel. This is why I wanted to start making use of layer groups, these folders inside the Layers panel, because otherwise, I mean, we'd have layers all over the place, right? Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to grab content box 2. I'm going to hold down Control or Command. I'm going to grab the photo layer and the photo itself from Flickr user Kawanja, and I'll grab the Vector Smart Object, that's the title, and the Lorem Ipsum type layer there. So a whole bunch of layers in there. I'm going to group them all together, Control or Command G, and we'll call this, of course, content box 2. Okay, good stuff. We're almost done. I'm going to grab content box 3, and we just need to move over the photo and the title text onto this guy, group it, and then we're done as far as the content boxes are concerned. So let's get the job done here. I'm going to go back to the high resolution layout. I will twist shut content box 2, twist open content box 3, and I'm going to grab the Vector Smart Object. That's the title. Again, just double check using your eyeball icon there, your visibility icon to make sure you have the right layer. I'm going to grab the Lobo 235 layer, that's the photograph, and then the cookie cutter layer itself, drag and drop into the medium resolution file, something like this. Okay? And then now it's just a matter of getting this guy positioned, perhaps something like that. Wonderful stuff. I hope you made it. I hope you made it here with me. What I'm going to do finally is I'm going to grab all of the layers that relate to content box 3. So content box 3 itself, holding down Control or Command, photo, Lobo 235, the Vector Smart Object, and the Lorem Ipsum type layer, Control or Command G, and there we go, content box 3. Well, I think the 3 content boxes look really, really good. There's only one more layer to do, and then we can move on here. If I scroll all the way down, we just have our footer left. That's it. That's the last area inside our wireframe that needs some design. If I flip over to the high resolution layout, that's how the footer looks. So this is going to be short and sweet. This is going to be really, really easy stuff. What I'm going to do is, well, I will set the color overlay for my footer layer. That's going to be solid black, of course, right? So give me just a moment to go and set that. Easy stuff. We've done that a number of times. And the only other thing we have to do is we have to take the menu across the top, duplicate them, and move them down on top of the footer. That's it. So let's see. I'm going to twist open the navigation menu layer group. I'll grab the type layer inside there. Once again, drag and drop that guy onto the new layer icon at the bottom of the toolbox. And then simply take this duplicate and drag and drop them down just above the footer layer, down inside towards the bottom of the layers panel there. Okay, so we just have to reposition this guy now. This is probably going to be the trickiest part out of all this. With my Move tool, I'm just going to drag this guy all the way down. And I'm going to hold down Shift as I go. Now, where it gets tricky is when you have to scroll down to find your footer. The menu's still in there, but he's behind some content. I'm using my down arrow keys with Shift as well as I go here. There he is. Let's see if I can snag this guy and drag him down the rest of the way. Something like that is what we're after. Okay? Once again, you might want to do a little bit of positioning and, fiddling around to get this guy positioned exactly the way you want. Perhaps something like that I think looks pretty darn good. There we go. That's our footer. Super easy stuff here. Let's grab the type layer, the footer layer, group those guys together, and I'll call this footer, and we may as well group the news feed, even though there's There's only one layer there. I always feel bad for that guy. So newsfeed, there you go. All right, there we are. If you want to hit Control or Command 1 on your keyboard, that'll zoom you to 100%. This is how the layout would now look inside a browser running on a medium resolution device. Okay, so that looks pretty darn good to me. Perhaps our text, in terms of the font sizes, needs some adjustment, but I'm not really going to worry about that sort of thing just yet. That gets a little bit more fiddly. We'll look after that in just a little while when we get into the CSS. So there you go. There's our medium resolution design now complete. Okay, we are ready to move on to the third and final device, the low-resolution device design here inside Photoshop. I think this is going to be really quick, really brief, because we've done this a number of times already, of course. And of course, the next big subject after this is the world of code. So in other words, we get to take everything that we've built inside Illustrator, inside Photoshop, and bring it into the world of HTML and CSS, which is going to be a lot of fun. So I want to try and get through this at a decent pace and then get into the good stuff, the code. All right, so the third device, the low-resolution layout, don't forget, is going to target devices that are running a resolution of 480 pixels in width or less. So as you can see here inside Photoshop, I closed out of the other files that we were just working on, the medium resolution and the high resolution files. If I flip over to Illustrator, I've already opened up the low resolution wireframe here inside Illustrator. So if you're following along, go ahead and open up the same file on your side. Now, we've done this a couple of times already, so this should be old news. I want to get rid of the strokes on the layout objects, on the wireframe objects that we've created here inside Illustrator. So what I'm going to do is I'll go ahead and select the objects. So that's going to be the header, the navigation bar. We don't have a slideshow, remember, for this layout, so we jump right into the 3 content boxes. And then the news feed can remain as is, and I'm going to scroll all the way down, hold down Shift, and grab the footer there. Okay, so those are my wireframe objects. I'm going to make sure down at the bottom of the toolbox that my stroke swatch is on top, and then I'll tap my question mark key or my / key on my keyboard to remove the stroke, just like so. Okay? All right, wonderful, good stuff. Now, we want to get this wireframe, if I zoom out just a little bit, this entire wireframe, we want to get him over inside Photoshop. In the previous resolutions, the previous devices, what we did is we opened this guy directly inside Photoshop, and that's perfectly fine. We've done that a number of times. I thought what I would do this time is change it up just a little bit. So check this out. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Control or Command A on my keyboard to select all. And I'm going to head to my transform dropdown. And what I could do, and I mentioned this not too long ago with the medium resolution, what I could do is I could note the dimensions here. I showed you this trick earlier. So what I could do is I could grab a pencil and a scrap piece of paper and I could write down 480 pixels by 1358 in my case. And then of course what I would do is I'd head over to Photoshop, create a brand new document using the same dimensions and paste this content in. However, I have something really cool that I want to show you that Photoshop's going to do for us. So if you want, you can note these dimensions, perhaps mentally or on a scrap piece of paper. That's fine. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy Control or Command C on my keyboard. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip back over to Photoshop. And I'll head up to the File menu and I'll choose New. Now check this out. Because we copied content from another application, Photoshop goes, oh, I assume you want to bring that content in at the same dimensions. How do you like that? Isn't that a cool little trick? So Photoshop already knows the dimensions for us, so we don't even really have to note them on a scrap piece of paper or mentally. So there we go. Hopefully this worked for you. So there's the 480 by 1358 in my case, at least. Okay. I'm going to go with a resolution of 72 pixels per inch. RGB for my color mode is just fine. I'm going to go ahead and click on OK. There we go. And then I'll go ahead and paste the wireframe content into my new Photoshop file, Control or Command V. Now, this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring my content in as pixels. I've been using Smart Objects quite a bit. I'm going to switch over to pixels now, and I'll go ahead and click on OK. And there we go. It drops it right into the dead center of my file, which is perfect. I just hit Enter on my keyboard to lock it in. There we go. Beautiful. Now, a couple of final things before we move on here. Notice inside the Layers panel, I'll zoom in just a little bit on this guy so you can have a bit of a closer look at this guy if you like. Notice inside the Layers panel, I actually have 2 layers now, so it's a slightly different process from what we've seen earlier. So I have Layer 2, which contains the wireframe, and then I have Layer 1, which doesn't contain anything at all. So what I'll do is I'll click on Layer 1, I'll hit the D key on my keyboard to make sure that my foreground and background colors are set to their defaults. And what I want to do is I want to fill Layer 1 with the background color. Do you remember how to do that? We've seen this a couple of times. Control or Command Delete, or Control or Command Backspace on your keyboard to fill that guy in. Okay, so there we go. Now we have a solid white background rather than the checkerboard pattern. I'll change the name of Layer 1 to, you guessed it, Background. There we go. And while we're at it, let's save this guy. Control or Command S. And I'm going to save this into my Work Files folder, and I'm going to call this Low Resolution. Beautiful. Great. There we are. Go ahead. Okay, inside the compatibility dialog box. Great. Now, all we need to do is take the objects that appear on the wireframe layer and break them apart across their own layers. It's going to be nice and easy and quick, so let's get to it. All right, let's start breaking apart the wireframe layout here inside Photoshop. I'm going to go after the header first. So we've seen a couple of different ways to go about selecting the header. Because we removed the strokes inside Illustrator, of course, the header and the menu run into each other, so it's pretty tough to tell where one of them ends and the other one begins. So earlier on, I showed you that you could use your info panel. That's perfectly fine. Way back when, with the high resolution, we simply used the marquee tool set to a fixed size, the rectangular marquee tool, that is. I think just for the sake of time, that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to grab my rectangular marquee tool out of the toolbox. You can tap your M key on your keyboard if you wish. Then from the options bar across the top, from the style drop-down menu, I'm going to say fixed size. Now, do you remember the dimensions of your header from the low resolution layout or the low resolution wireframe? It's going to be 480 pixels by 130 pixels. So lock that in there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to bring my cursor up towards the top left. This is usually how I do this. I go above and just to the left of the canvas itself, if you will. And then I just single click, and that creates the, not only does it create the marching ants, the selection, but it positions it perfectly for me way up in the top left corner. Okay? So there we go. And inside the Layers panel, I'm going to make sure that Layer 2 is selected. Now what I want to do is I want to take the content, the pixels that appear inside the marching ants here, and I want to cut them. I want to move them onto their own layer. Do you remember the keyboard shortcut? It's going to be Control-Shift-J or Command-Shift-J on your keyboard. Okay? So there we go. There's our header. I'm going to go ahead and rename this guy header. And you know, while we're at it, let's do the menu. We may as well do the menu. We're here. So I'm going to go back to the layer that contains the wireframe, which is going to be Layer 2. Okay? And this is my situation where I use my down and dirty selection. So I'm going to head back to the options bar, switch the style menu back to normal. Okay, so now I can just freehand out rectangular selections like this. All I'm going to do is take a guess at where the top of the menu is. I know the menu is pretty narrow, so if I come up here somewhere, I know I'm going to get the entire menu if I click and drag down below it and then right across, something like that. Okay, so I know I have my menu in there. You can double check if you want by disabling the visibility of the header layer if you wish, something like this. And then once again, Command-Shift-J or Control-Shift-J on your keyboard to create your new layer. And I'll call this nav menu. Here we go. Great. All right, so we have our content boxes to go. We have the newsfeed and the footer. So this is going to go pretty quickly here, I think. All right, let's take care of our 3 content boxes. So, of course, the header and the main navigation menu are done. I'm just going to scroll down here a little bit. The 3 content boxes, how do you want to pull them out? We could use the rectangular marquee tool. That would be perfectly fine, so long as we enclose the content box within marching ants, something like that. You don't have to be too careful with your selection. Why am I not being careful with these sorts of selections, by the way? Because there's nothing inside the white space there. It's just empty. So Photoshop's only going to cut the actual pixels off of the wireframe layer, just in case you weren't sure why I was doing that. So this is one way to do it. You can use your magic wand tool. That would be fine as well. A couple of different ways to do it. Doesn't really matter. We're all going to wind up with the same result, right? So I'm just going to make sure that I have the correct layer selected inside the Layers panel. So Layer 2. I've got my selection here, Command-Shift-J, and there's my new layer with Content Box 1 on it. All right, so no big deal here. Content box 1. There we go. Okay, so let's go and finish these guys off. Maybe what I'll do is I'll switch over to my magic wand tool for the last 2 guys here. So I'll go and grab him out of the toolbox. Take the second content box. I'm just double checking that I have the correct layers selected inside the Layers panel. And I'll single click on Content Box 2. There we go. Command-Shift-J. And of course, name this guy appropriately. Content Box 2. Very lovely. One more to go here. Single click on Content Box 3, Command-Shift-J. And of course, name this guy. Content Box 3. There we go. Beautiful stuff. Nice and easy and quick. Because we've done this several times, we can obviously move a lot faster, right? So good stuff. There we go. All right, so if I just pan down a little bit here inside the low resolution layout, we have the news feed and we have the footer, and then we're on to design. So things are coming together nice and quickly. All right, let's finish up the breaking apart of the low resolution wireframe. Once again, make sure that you have the correct layer selected inside the Layers panel. Really, it's just the footer that we have left, and we have to do some layer naming, and then we can move on to the designs. So make sure you grab Layer 2 there inside your Layers panel. We want to grab the footer. You can use any method you want. The marquee tool is fine. The magic wand tool is fine. Doesn't really matter a whole heck of a lot. So I'm just going to use my marquee tool here to select the footer. Command-Shift-J. There we go. And I'll rename this guy footer. Okay. Now, the only thing that's left on Layer 2 is going to be the news feed, right? So I'm going to rename Layer 2 to news feed. There we are, nice and easy. And I'll move him above the footer layer like that. So everything's nice and orderly inside the Layers panel. That's it. The breaking apart of the low resolution wireframe is now complete. So now we have everything isolated, so we can start applying design to these isolated wireframe objects. Now, before we jump into that, just make sure that everything is saved up. So hit Controller-Command-S, and now we're ready for some design. With the low resolution wireframe broken apart here inside Photoshop, we're ready to now move on to the next step, which of course is applying design to the wireframe here inside Photoshop. So once again, this is really not going to take a whole lot of time. We're going to zip through this pretty quickly. As you can see, what I've done here is I've opened up the medium resolution layout here over on the left-hand side with the low resolution file, of course, open towards the middle. So don't forget, once you have both files open, you can head to the window menu and then down to arrange, and then you can choose float all in windows, which is exactly what I did. You can arrange your screen in any manner that makes sense for you, but this kind of makes sense to me, sort of the side by side here. So all right, let's get started here with the header. So I'm going to make sure that I'm inside the low resolution layout, and I'm getting a warning here. I'm going to make sure that I have my header layer selected inside the Layers panel. The first thing that I want to do here is I want to make sure to set my background color for this guy. We've done this many, many times, so let's go and do this here via the Layer Style dialog box. I'll go and set up my color overlay, and once again, all I'm going to do is simply sample the blue out of the header from the medium resolution layout. Very simple stuff, okay? Go ahead and click on OK a couple of times to get yourself out of there. All right, the only other thing we need for our header is the logo, and then of course we also have to create our layer group as well. So what I'll do next is I'm going to make sure that I'm on the Move tool inside the toolbox. I'm going to flip over to the medium resolution document or the medium resolution layout, and I'm going to go and find the logo inside the header layer group inside the medium resolution file. Okay, this fella right here. And of course, all we're going to do is we're going to drag and drop this guy. Okay. Now, I may have mentioned this earlier. We can either drag and drop from the layers panel, or with the Move tool selected, I could grab the logo from the medium resolution file and drag and drop it over into the low resolution file, if I so choose. All right, there we go. There's our logo. He's going to need to be sized a little bit. Now, you're going to have to decide exactly how you want to do this. Remember, this is a low resolution layout, or this layout, said another way, is going to be viewed on low resolution devices. So perhaps you want to center the logo across the top and you want it to be a little bit larger, or maybe you want to have the logo scaled down a little bit smaller. It's entirely up to you. You'll have to decide what you want to do here. There's no right or wrong here. This is design, right? So I think maybe what I'll do with myself is I'll hit Controller Command T to get myself into my free transform, and maybe I'll just pull this guy over towards the left a little bit and nudge him down a little bit with my arrow keys, and perhaps I'll scale him just a little bit. Maybe I'll make him a little bit smaller and kind of get him positioned up there, maybe something like that. I kind of like the idea, actually, of having them centered inside the layout. Maybe I'll decide to go and actually do that maybe a little bit later on, but I think for now I'm just going to leave it as is. So there's the logo in place. Of course, the color overlay set for the header object itself as well. Inside the layers panel, I'll grab both layers, and of course I'll hit Controller Command G to create my layer group. Okay, so there we go. We're off to a good start here. Now let's move on to the main navigation menu. Well, as you can see, I caved in. I decided to go and center my logo inside the header. I got thinking about it after I wrapped up the previous exercise, and I thought, that'd be pretty cool to have the logo a little bit larger and have it centered and so on. So I went ahead and did that. I just used my free transform to scale it up a little bit. The other thing that I did as well, and I know that this is somewhat off topic, but I'll bounce it off you anyway, is I wanted to make sure that the logo was centered in the middle of the layout, of course. So what I did is I grabbed the logo, and then I held down Controller Command, and I grabbed the header as well. And then I went to Layer, and then all the way down to Align, and then I chose Horizontal Centers right there, okay? Or you could also use the icons across the top on your options bar, the align icons that we see there. That would be fine as well. Anyway, just something that I kind of went for. I think it looks better this way. In any regard, let's move on to the topic at hand, which is the navigation menu. Now, we're going to run into a bit of an issue here with our navigation menu, but I think we'll be able to get everything under control here eventually. So what I'm going to do here, first of all, I'm going to go and set the overlay color for the nav menu. Okay, so go ahead and do the same there. It's going to be solid black, just like before. Go ahead and click on OK to set that up. Okay, no big deal. The next thing that we'll do is we'll go and grab our menu items from the medium resolution file. Okay, so I have the nav menu layer selected inside the low resolution file. I'm going to go and head back over to the medium resolution file, and I've got to go and find that text, that tiny orange text that you can hardly see on screen. If I zoom in perhaps a little bit, this stuff here, which you can probably still hardly see. I'm going to go and find that text inside the layers panel. I know that he's inside the navigation menu. There he is right there. Okay, so I'm going to grab this type layer. I'm going to pull this type layer over into the low resolution file here, like so, right? No big deal. Now, here's the problem. Here's the issue that we run into. You've got to remember that people are going to be viewing this layout on a very low resolution handheld device. And even as the text is right now, even as it stands right now, it's pretty tiny. If I zoom into 100%, Control or Command 1 on your keyboard, and give me a second here just to reposition things, the text is still pretty small. I mean, maybe it's okay at this size, but it's pretty darn small. The other thing too, as you can see, is my menu items have run off the right-hand side of my screen. Okay? So what we're going to wind up having, and we're really going to see this once we get into the code, the HTML and the CSS, is our main navigation menu is actually going to break onto multiple lines. Okay, so it's going to be a multi-line navigation menu, and there really isn't a whole lot that we can do about that because it still has to be readable text. We could put it all on one line and no one would be able to read the text. That would be fine, but we really want to think about usability here. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do, and I hope this goes okay for us. What I'm going to do is I'm going to find Content Box 1, that layer inside the Layers panel. I'm going to go and hide his visibility. Okay, I'm just going to turn him off. And then what I'm going to do is, let's see here, I'm going to grab my Type tool from the toolbox just by tapping the T key, and I'm going to click inside my type object here. And what I'm going to have to do here, this is going to be a little bit tricky. Hopefully it won't be too bad. I'm going to find the point in the text where the text begins running off the edge of the page. So on line something, right? I'm going to click in there. I'm going to grab that space in there. In fact, we put a triple space in there. I'm going to select that space there, or the triple space, and I'm going to hit Shift-Enter to insert a line break. Okay, or a soft return, as it's sometimes called. Now, everything is center aligned here, which is great. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to head back to my Move tool, and then holding down Shift and tapping my left arrow key, I'm going to shove all of the text back over towards the center, something like this. Okay, so we're going to wind up with this multi-line menu, if that makes sense. Now, something else that we're going to have to do, there's still a little bit of fiddling that we're going to have to do here. I'm going to go and grab the nav menu layer itself, and he needs a little bit more height, obviously, because my menu's running off the bottom edge, right? So I'm going to use my free transform for this, Controller Command T, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the bottom edge and just tug him down a little bit, something like this. Okay, as a matter of fact, maybe I'll even give myself a little bit more space, perhaps something like that. With that set, I'm going to throw something else at you here, and I'm going to leave this up to you to fiddle around with. This is entirely up to you. I'm going to go back to my type layer. If you're satisfied with the way the text looks here, that's great. You can leave things as is. However, you may decide to get back into your text object by using your type tool, again, just tapping T on your keyboard and getting into this type object. You may decide to select all of the text there, Controller Command A, and then increase the size of the text. If you think that it's a little bit too small, you can increase it a little bit. Mine's about 13 point. Maybe I decide I want to bring that up because, again, I'm thinking of usability. I'm thinking of someone viewing this on a very low resolution device. So I'm going to leave that up to you. I'm going to finish things off here by making sure that my type layer is selected, and then I'll hold down Controller Command and I'll grab my nav menu layer, and I want to make sure that the text and the nav menu layer are all nice and lined up by using, once again, the align commands here inside Photoshop, either from the options bar here across the top or from the layer menu, which I showed you earlier on. And then when we're finished, make sure you have your layers still selected and you can go and create your layer group. Okay, and I'll call this navigation menu. Okay, so the menu looks pretty good here. If you want to go and adjust the size, that's perfectly fine. Once you have that set, then we can move on to our content boxes. I really want to move on to the 3 content boxes, but before we do, we have to do some adjustment to our layout. If I go and turn on the visibility of Content Box 1, he now runs into the navigation menu above him because, of course, we extended the height of the navigation menu, right? So give me a moment here. We're going to have to do a little bit of fiddling, further fiddling. I'm going to disable the visibility, once again, of Content Box 1. I'm not going to worry about that guy just yet. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try and kill 2 birds with 1 stone here. What I'm going to wind up doing is taking the navigation menu that we've already built, and we'll use that as our footer as well. So we'll simultaneously set up the footer and adjust our layout. I hope that sounds like fun. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to zoom out a little bit so I can see my entire layout, or the majority of my layout anyway. Give me just a second to kind of get things positioned. There's my footer way down at the bottom of the layout, of course. I'm going to find the footer layer inside the layers panel, and I'm going to get rid of them. I'm going to drag and drop them onto the trash can icon at the bottom of the layers panel, okay? And if you receive a warning, a Photoshop warning that says, are you sure you want to delete the footer layer? Just say yes. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to take the entire navigation menu layer group inside the layers panel, and I'm going to duplicate them by dragging and dropping him onto the new layer icon at the bottom of the layers panel. And voila, we get a duplicate not only of the layer folder or the layer group, but all of the layers inside that layer group. Pretty cool. So rather than calling this navigation menu copy, I'm going to double click on that and I'm going to call this footer. All right. And then rather than calling this nav menu, I'm going to call that footer as well. Okay, perfect. All right, let's take this layer group and drag and drop him all the way down towards the bottom of the layers panel, just above the background layer. All right, good stuff. Make sure you have your Move tool selected inside the toolbox on the left-hand side. You can tap your V key if you wish. And what I'm going to do, very simply, is click and drag this guy all the way down towards the bottom of the layout. I'm holding down Shift, by the way, as I'm dragging to make sure that I'm constraining this guy to a perfectly straight move all the way down the document. And I'm just using my down arrow key here just to do a little bit of, I call it micro positioning there. Okay, something like this. So let me zoom in on this guy just so you can see what I have here. I just hit Command 1. You can hit Control 1 or Command 1 on your keyboard to zoom in there if you like. There, something like this. Okay, so I just want to make sure that this footer is all the way down at the bottom of the layout. Okay. All right, good stuff. So there we go. There's the footer. Wonderful. That was pretty straightforward, pretty easy. And I got to show you how you can take a layer group and duplicate the entire layer group, including its contents, which is a cool trick to know. Now, the next thing that I want to do is I want to adjust the rest of the layout. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to Content Box 1 now, and I'll turn his visibility on. And of course, we still see that problem that we had earlier. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I have the Content Box 1 layer selected. I'm going to hold down Control or Command. I'll grab Content Box 2 and Content Box 3 and the news feed and the footer all the way down there. Don't grab the background layer though. And make sure that you don't grab header or navigation menu either. Okay? Go ahead and let go of Control or Command. We're still on our Move tool. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use my down arrow key to move all of the layers, all of the content on all of the selected layers simultaneously, okay? Notice now we have a little bit of white space above Content Box 1. That's exactly what we want. So perhaps something like this, okay? So literally what we've done here is we've taken all of the material inside our layout, all of the content inside our layout, from Content Box 1 all the way down, and we've shoved it all down, vertically down inside our layout. Okay. However, you'll notice now that the footer content is getting cut off, okay, which is no good. So what we need to do now, and this is the last step in this, this crazy adjustment exercise, is we need to increase the canvas size, the size of the document inside Photoshop, okay? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to head to the image menu and then down to canvas size. You can hit Command Option C or Control Alt C on your keyboard if you like, into the canvas size dialog box. As far as the height goes, we're going to have to take a bit of a guess. I'm not 100% sure what I'm going to wind up using. And I have a suspicion that you and I have different heights. I have 1358. I have no idea what you have. I'm going to try adding on just a little bit more. I'm going to wind up going with 1400. And if that doesn't work, if that's not enough, then I'll try adding on more. And if it's too much, we can crop off the rest, you know, this sort of thing. So I'm going to try 1400. I'll go ahead and click on OK. Scroll down. Okay, I have a little bit of extra space there down at the bottom, but I think that's tolerable. What I'll do is I'll grab my footer layer group and I'll just position him down just a little bit more just by tapping my down arrow key. If you wind up with, you know, a massive amount of space underneath your footer, you're really not happy with that, you could try doing an undo and then heading back into the canvas size dialog box and taking another crack at it. Or what you could do is you could zoom all the way out on your document, something like this. And then you could use your crop tool to go and crop off some extra content. As a matter of fact, I've wound up with some extra space across the top of my document. So I'm going to go ahead and use my crop tool. I'll grab the crop tool here. Now, this is Photoshop CS6, so the crop tool behaves a little bit differently here inside CS6. In previous versions of Photoshop, you could just click and drag a bounding box. Here I actually get these resize handles that I'm going to wind up using for the cropping of my document here. So there we go. I'm going to wind up with something like that, I think, which looks good. I'm just going to double check the bottom to make sure the bottom is set perfectly fine. There we go. We're looking good. So the crop here inside Photoshop CS6 is a little bit different from previous versions, as I mentioned just a moment ago. If you are indeed running a previous version of Photoshop, you can click and drag out a crop frame, as I mentioned just a moment ago, and then you'll get resize handles on all four sides and in all four corners, which you can use to set your crop frame. And then when you're ready, go ahead and hit enter on your keyboard, and that will finish the job for you. So there we go. There's adjusting the overall layout. I hope that went well for you. You shouldn't have any extra space above or below your layout, and we should now be ready to go after our 3 content boxes. So as we've seen over the past few exercises, setting up the design for the low resolution is a little bit more fiddly because we're dealing with such a narrow width, right? So hopefully this is going well for you, and hopefully it's going at a decent pace for you as well. Let's go after the 3 content boxes. I'm going to go after the first one here, and then we'll take care of the other 2 in just a moment. So inside your layers panel, of course, make sure you're on content box 1. Let's go ahead and set his background color or his color overlay, of course. No problems there. That's nice and easy. Now, as far as the content goes, I'm going to go and grab some of the content out of the medium resolution layout that we have here. So this is the Emily Dickinson photograph that we have here from of course, our Flickr user. Okay, so I've got to go and find that content once again inside that file's layers panel. So give me a moment here to twist shut the navigation menu layer group, and I will twist open the content box 1 layer group. There's no slideshow inside the low resolution layout, of course, so we're jumping right into the content boxes. All right, let's see. It's the Vector Smart object that I want. That's the title, the experience inside the first content box. I hope you can see that okay, as well as the Emily Dickinson photograph. So I'm going to grab these 2 objects and I will drag and drop them over into the low resolution file, something like this. And then, of course, with these layers still selected, the objects still selected, I'm going to go and position them inside the low resolution file. Okay, something like this. Now, we have to kind of decide how we want to handle this. Do we want to have the photograph and the text, even though the text is kind of getting cut off? We'll deal with that in just a second. Do we want to have that content centered, just like the logo, or do we want to have it sitting over towards the left-hand side like it is in the medium resolution layout? We really have to decide for ourselves how we want to do this, okay? So it could take a little bit of fiddling to actually pull this off. I think what I'm going to wind up doing is perhaps something like this. I'm going to grab the Vector Smart object and the Emily Dickinson layer there, and I'll position them over towards the left as I've done there. And then the title itself, the experience, I'm going to try pulling it down just a little bit. I'm just tapping my down arrow key on my keyboard. I still have my move tool selected inside the toolbox, of course, just to pull this down just a little bit. And then I think I'm going to have to scale these guys as well. So I'll grab both layers and then use my free transform, and I'll have to scale them down just a little bit. Perhaps something like that. Hopefully should be okay. Okay? Maybe I decide for the low resolution that the text shouldn't spill, the title shouldn't spill outside the top of the content box. So I'm going to pull everything inside the blue content box, something like this, okay? But again, it's up to you. You've got to decide as the designer, as the developer here, how you want things to look. I think for myself, something like this looks decent. It looks pretty good. All right, now we have some placeholder text that we want to insert here as well. This is going to require a little bit of adjustment on our part as well. I'm going to grab my Vector Smart Object layer, this fella right here, and then I'll flip back over to the medium resolution layout. There's the Lorem Ipsum placeholder text layer inside the medium resolution layout. I'll grab this layer and, you guessed it, of course, drag and drop this guy over. Okay. Now, this is going to, as I said just a second ago, require a little bit of adjustment, a little bit of fiddling on our part to get this looking half decent. So I have this huge text frame here. I think what I'm going to wind up doing is I'm going to be doing some scaling here, and I'm also going to be doing some text size adjustment here as well, possibly anyway. I'm going to tap my T key on my keyboard to get myself into my type tool, click inside the text to open up the text frame. Really, it's the resize handles that I'm after here on the left and right sides of this text frame, and also possibly the top. Maybe I'll pull the top down just a little bit, something like that. So you got to remember too that this is going to be viewed on a handheld device, so probably what will wind up happening is we'll have to increase the size of the text just to make it legible on a handheld device, on a low resolution device, right? So if I go and select all the text inside here, Controller Command A, after I have the frame resized there, my font size is about 16.5 points, so it's pretty big already. Maybe I decide I want to increase that to 18 point or possibly a little bit larger, something like this. Again, we have to think about usability. So in any regard, you may want to fiddle with that once again a little bit on your own. Okay. Once we are finished up here, we can head back to the toolbox and grab our Move tool. That looks okay. I'm not sure that I'm pleased with that, but I think I will leave it for now. Of course, we can do lots of fiddling and adjustment once we get into HTML and CSS, but I think for now, as far as the mock-up here inside Photoshop is concerned, I think that looks okay. So we just need to create our layer group inside the Layers panel. So let's go ahead and do that. Grab all of your layers here using Controller Command G to create the group, and we'll call this Content Box 1. Perfect. We only have 2 more to go. So as you can see, we're getting a little bit fiddly here with our 3 content boxes. Let's go and finish off the other 2 content boxes, and that will conclude the low resolution design and also the design process here inside Photoshop for all 3 layouts, which is great. So we're really getting somewhere, which is wonderful. I think the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go and set my background colors for the 2 content boxes. That's kind of the easy stuff. Let's get the easy stuff out of the way first, and then we'll go after the fiddly stuff. So there's the first content box, or I should say the second content box, the first of the 2 content boxes. That's what I meant to say. Okay, color overlay, and we'll set that to blue as well. Okay, good stuff. So there we are. Okay. I think the other thing that I'll do is I'll get the placeholder text in place as well. That's kind of an easy job, so we'll do that as well. I'm going to twist open the Content Box 1 layer group. I'm going to grab the placeholder text and duplicate them twice. Once again, just by dragging that type layer down to the new layer icon down at the bottom of the Layers panel. Okay. And then, of course, we will take these copies and position them appropriately inside the Layers panel. Something like this, if I can get the Layers panel to cooperate with me. There we go. Okay, and we can collapse down the Content Box 1 layer group. Okay, now give me just a second. Looks like I didn't get my second type layer. This happened to me earlier where I had moved the type layer, but it didn't move it out of the layer group. There we go. Something like that. Okay, so we should have text layer, Content Box 2, and then text layer, and then Content Box 3. A little bit confusing, a little bit complicated. Grab your, let's see, this would be the first copy of the placeholder text. With our Move tool, let's go ahead and drag and drop this guy down into position inside the second content box, something like this. And then let's repeat that for the third block of placeholder text. We'll go and move that guy down onto Content Box 3, like so. Okay? All right, good stuff. Okay, so that wasn't too bad. That was pretty straightforward. Now what I want to do is I want to go and grab the 2 photos and the title text for the remaining content boxes. Now, earlier when we were setting up the first content box, I did a little bit of scaling. I did a little bit of free transform to scale this guy down a little bit. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to grab the content box to layer inside the layers panel, and I'm going to make use of guides inside Photoshop to help me resize the photographs and the text that I'm about to drop into this layout. Now, I'm not sure if you know about guides inside Photoshop or not, but we're about to be given a crash course on them if you've never used them before. Control-Command-R on your keyboard. That'll bring up your rulers. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring my cursor into the ruler on the left-hand side, the vertical ruler, and I'm going to click and drag out. And what that's going to do is that's going to drop a guide into my document for me. Notice I'm going to drop this guide, or I'm going to let go of my mouse right up against the left edge of the Emily Dickinson photograph. Okay, so this is a guide. It's a non-printing guide that's only used for layout, really. Okay. And I'm going to repeat that one more time for the right-hand side of the photo as well. So I'm going to bring my cursor into the vertical ruler there on the left-hand side, click and drag, and I'm going to drop this guy onto the right edge of the Emily Dickinson photograph, just like that. Okay, so now I know the width of the photos once I drop them into this layout. So there you go. There's your guides. Control-Command-R once again to turn off your rulers. All right, let's go after the content box to photo. So I'm going to head back to the medium resolution layout, and I'm going to have to go and find that photo and the title text. So that's going to be inside content box 2. So now it's going to be the vector smart object that we're after. That's tickets and rates, the title text, plus the photo, which is from Flickr user Kawanja, plus the photo cookie cutter layer, don't forget. Okay, so 3 layers are coming in. Grab all 3, drag and drop them into the low resolution layout. Okay, now this is why we created the guides. If you were sitting there going, why are we creating guides? What purpose do they serve? I'm going to set it up so that the second photograph is lined up, his left edge is lined up with the first guide inside our layout there. There we are, something like this. Then I'm going to hit my free transform, Control-Command-T, and I'm going to hold down Shift, and I'm going to scale this guy down and try and position him between the 2 guides, something like that. Okay, there we are. Now, it might take a little bit more fiddling. I kind of got lucky here. Things went really smoothly for me, which is nice. I'll hit Enter on my keyboard to lock that in. And then I'm going to have to do a little bit of fiddling with the actual text, tickets and rates. I said that I didn't want the text to spill outside of the blue box, so I'm going to have to pull him down. I'll have to take the photo and nudge him down as well, just using my down arrow key on my keyboard, something like that. So there's the second content box, which is great. Let's go and set up the layer group. I hope that went smoothly for you. I'm just going to go and grab all the layers for content box 2 and group them together here. Content box 2, there we are. I'm going to go ahead and put the brakes on here and let you get caught up and let you take a breath. And when you're ready, let's jump into the third content box, and we'll also, of course, be finishing off the low resolution layout. All right, how did you do? I hope you're doing all right on your side. We only have the third content box to go, and then we are finished with the design, with the layout here inside Photoshop, which is great. Okay, so let's get the job done here, and we can move on into the wonderful world of code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that content box 3 is selected inside my layers panel. And then I'll head over to the medium resolution design. It's the hour location. I don't know if you can see that in there or not. Hour location, and then, of course, the 3 jack-o'-lanterns, the 3 pumpkins. Okay, so let's go and find those layers inside the layers panel, inside the medium resolution layout. Here we go. Content box 3, we want the smart object, which of course is the title. We want Lobo235, our Flickr user, and then the photo cookie cutter layer itself. Okay, grab all 3, and then of course the good old drag and drop there. Okay, perfect, something like that. With the layers still selected, with the object still selected inside the layers panel, go ahead and drop yourself into the free transform, Control-Command-T on your keyboard, and let the scaling commence. I'm holding down Shift here to make sure that I'm not distorting anything as I scale, something like that. You can hit Enter on your keyboard when you get everything nice and scaled up there. And then, once again, I'm just going to do a little bit of positioning with the Hour Location title there. So I'll head to the Vector Smart Object layer, and I'll nudge this guy down somewhat anyway, something like that. And then I think I want to reposition the photo as well. There we go. I hope all this layout stuff is happening for you. It's making sense for you. There we go, something like this. Okay, wonderful. All right. Now, let's go ahead and create our layer group. Let's grab the placeholder text layer, the Vector Smart Object, the photo, the cookie cutter, and Content Box 3. Grab them all, Controller Command G on your keyboard, and we'll call this Content Box 3. There we go. That's it. We are done. That's how things are looking for us inside our low-resolution design. Of course, the newsfeed we're going to leave as is. I'm going to grab my newsfeed layer and group him as well. You don't have to do this, but I'll throw him into a layer group as well and call that newsfeed. There we are. And collapse him down. All right, make sure to save your file, Controller Command S. I'm going to hit the F key on my keyboard. That drops me into full screen mode. So now I can see this guy full screen. I'm also going to hit Control or Command semicolon on my screen. That disables the guides that you and I had set up earlier. Okay? And this is how our layout now is going to look for us. Everything looks great. We have the footer in place way down at the bottom, the 3 content boxes. Of course, no slideshow. And also some of us, including myself, decided to center the logo inside the header. So thus concludes the low-resolution design. Looks great. And this also concludes the design phase of our overall responsive design process. So now that we've gotten through the wireframe, we've gotten through the design, that's the second part, of course, we're now ready to move on to the third part, which is, of course, code. I hope you're ready for it. Let's jump into it. All right. You and I have completed 3 different designs, 3 different layouts here inside Photoshop. Of course, here is the high-resolution layout. This is how we've decided that we want our layout to look on high-resolution devices. And then, of course, the medium-resolution layout, which, of course, I have open handy for me here inside Photoshop. And then, of course, we just finished off working on the low-resolution layout. So there's all 3 layouts there inside Photoshop. Give me just a second. What I'll do is I'll arrange these guys vertically across the Photoshop interface. I'll just tap my tab key so we can see all 3 at once here. There we go. There's all 3 layouts. High on the left, medium over on the right-hand side, and low there in the middle. So the idea here, very much like the wireframe process, is to get sign-off from our client or from our boss or coworkers or even ourselves if it's a project that we're working on ourselves. Oftentimes I'll take these designs, I'll print them off, I'll grab a Sharpie marker and I'll maybe make some adjustments or make some notes and so on, come back to Photoshop, refine the layout even further, refine the design even further. We don't want to move into the world of code until we're completely satisfied with what we have. Okay, very important. It's a lot easier to change things at this stage of the game and then get into code later on than it is to rearrange our code after the fact. Okay, so we're satisfied with this. We've gotten sign off on this. We're ready now to move into the world of code. Now, this may seem like somewhat of a daunting task. If you've never gotten into code before, I'm going to do my absolute best to make this as simple and straightforward for you as I can. So give me a moment here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to flip all the way down to my desktop. I'm going to hide everything. What we want to do now is we want to create some files, some new files inside our work files folder. So specifically an HTML file and a corresponding CSS file. And once again, if you've never done this work before, I'm going to do my best to make this as absolutely straightforward for you as possible. So what we're going to need is a coding application of some sort. There are many, many, many different applications that you can make use of. You could use Dreamweaver, for instance. You could use TextEdit here on the Mac. You could use Notepad over on the Windows side. That would be perfectly fine. There's one called Notepad++ for the Windows side. There's one called Text Wrangler. There's tons of them out there. My personal favorite is a Mac-only application called Coda, and I've used it for a number of years. I love it. It's really easy and straightforward to work with. Okay, so you're going to have to find a program that you want to use to hand code with. All right, now I have to stress here that you don't want to use a program like Microsoft Word or OpenOffice Writer. These are word processing applications. What we want is a text editor, like a plain text editor. So hopefully you have your hands on just such an application. What we want to do is we want to create a brand new document inside that application. Okay, so as soon as I launched Coda, it created for me a brand new blank document. For yourself, you might have to choose File New. And what we want to do inside this file is we want to begin creating the structure for our HTML document. All right, now this is going to be really, really simple stuff. So if you've never done this before, here we go. We're about to code a web page from complete scratch all by hand, and it's really not that hard. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to type in open angle bracket, HTML, close angle bracket. Okay. Now, Coda is a great application. This is one of the many reasons why I like Coda, is it closes what's referred to as my HTML element for me. So notice here, it typed in for me open angle bracket / HTML, close angle bracket. Now, if your program isn't as helpful, you're going to have to manually type that in. Open angle bracket / HTML, close angle bracket. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop my cursor between those two guys. These are called element tags. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit enter a whole bunch of times to space these guys apart. Okay, so what I've just done is I've defined this document as an HTML document. Now, inside the HTML element, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and create two more elements. Okay, I think of elements as containers or boxes. Okay, if you want sort of a conceptual idea of how these guys work. So the first element is going to be called head. So I'm going to type in open angle bracket. This is back up towards the top of my code. Open angle bracket, HEAD, head, close angle bracket. Okay? And then once again, you're going to have to type in possibly your closing head tag. So open angle bracket / HEAD, close angle bracket. And what I'm going to do, once again, is I'm going to give myself just a little bit of space between these guys. Something like that, I think. So we have the HTML element. Okay, this guy's huge. And then inside the HTML element, we have the head. And I said I actually wanted two of these guys. So the next guy that I want is called body. Okay, so I'm just going to move my cursor down a little bit just below the closing head tag down here somewhere. And I'm going to type in open angle bracket, body, close angle bracket. And then once again, make sure to close your body. Something like that. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the body, the open angle bracket / body close angle bracket, this closing tag, and I'm going to cut them, Control or Command X, and I'm going to paste them all the way down just above the closing HTML tag, just like so. Congratulations, you just created an HTML document. It's really, really straightforward stuff. Okay, so we have our HTML container. Inside that container, we have two smaller containers, a head and a body. All right, good stuff. Go ahead and save your file now. I'm going to choose File, and then I'm going to head down to Save As. Now, what I want to do is I want to save this guy into my Work Files folder, and I also want to make sure, not to hide his extension at least here on the Mac, I want to make sure to call him .html. Now, specifically what I'm going to do is I'm going to call him index.html because I want this guy to be the opening page for my website. All right, so index.html, saving this guy into my work files folder. Perfect. Go ahead and click on save. That's all there is to it. Okay, great. We're off to a good start. Now let's go and create what's referred to as our external style sheet. So if you've never coded out a web page before, as you can see, it's fairly straightforward, at least initially. And if you've done this before, this is all old news. All right, now if you want to, just before we go and create our external style sheet, if you want to, this is completely optional, what you could do is you could drop your cursor anywhere inside your body element, that body container that we set up, and you could type in your name, perhaps your first name or your first name and your last name, something like this, right? And then save your document, Control or Command S. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go all the way down to my desktop, into my work files folder, and sure enough, there's my index file that we just saved out in the previous exercise. And I could open this guy up inside a web browser, just double clicking on him to open him up inside a browser, and sure enough, there's my name, right? It's not terribly exciting, not yet anyway. Wait until we get those Photoshop layouts, those Photoshop designs inside our browser. Now that's really going to be cool, but anyway, there you go. That's just kind of a quick, kind of neat thing that you can do if you've never really done this stuff before. All right, now back to the task at hand, which is to set up our external style sheet. Now, how this is going to work, again, I'm just going to break it down just in case you've never done this before. We're going to have two documents. We're going to have an HTML file, and we're going to have an external CSS file. The HTML file contains the raw content for our page, okay? Things like the graphics and the text and layout containers and things like that. The CSS, the external style sheet, he drives the formatting of the HTML file. He controls the look and feel of the HTML. That's how it works. So HTML is structure, CSS is dress up. All right, so let's go and create this external style sheet. What I'm going to do is inside my coding application, I'm not sure where you are. You could be in Text Wrangler or Notepad or who knows. Here, of course, I'm inside Coda. I'm going to choose File New, and Coda actually allows me to choose CSS as a file type. Now, I'm not sure that your application is going to allow you to do that or not. If it won't allow you to do that, and I'm guessing it's not going to allow you to do that, you can just create a brand new blank file. All right, so now we have this thing called an external style sheet. We actually haven't set them up with any formatting rules just yet. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to choose File, Save As. This is inside the new blank document, right? And I'm going to save this guy also inside my work files folder. Now, the file extension that we want to use this time is .css. So the first time it was .html. The second time now it's going to be .css. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give this guy a name, something like styles.css. That's usually what I name these guys. Okay, and then go ahead and click on Save. Now, if your application gives you any kind of warnings like, hey, are you really sure you want to use .css, you know, things like that, just make sure to actually use that file extension. You might have to confirm that you want to use that file extension. All right, so wonderful. We have two files, the HTML and the CSS, but they're not connected to one another. So in other words, the CSS file is not controlling the HTML file, not yet anyway. What we want to do now is we want to connect the two together. We want to imagine literally plugging a cord or a cable into one file from another file, okay? So here's how we're going to do it. Inside the HTML file, make sure you're inside index.html, okay? Look for that head container that you and I had inserted previously, and we're going to put in just a little bit of code inside this head container, all right? Now, give me a moment. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to zoom in on my code just a little bit, just so you can see it a little bit more clearly. All right, here's what I'm going to type in. It's very simple. Open angle bracket, link, space, rel, R-E-L, equals, and then in quotes, style sheet. Okay, so make sure it's rel equals, open quote, style sheet, close quote, and then after the close quote, I'm going to put in a space, and then I'll type in type, the word type, equals, and then in quotes, text /CSS. Okay, I hope you're still with me here. I'm going to throw in a space after that closing quote. I'm going to type in media equals, and then in quotes, all. All right, and then we're almost done here. I'm going to throw in a space, and I'm going to say href equals, and then in quotes, whatever you and I had called our external style sheet. So I called mine styles.css, if you'll recall. After the closing quote, I'm going to throw in my closing angle bracket, just like that. Okay, so that's the code. This is the cord or the cable that connects one file to another file. Okay, this is a reference to our external style sheet. So once again, link, rel equals style sheet, type equals text/CSS, media all, href equals, and then whatever you would called your external style sheet. Okay? All right, go ahead and make sure to save up your external style sheet. Good stuff. So in other words, how this works is the HTML file points to the external style sheet. All right, good stuff. Now, let's see if we can test our external style sheet to make sure that it's working. All right, let's test our connection to our external style sheet to make sure that everything's functioning correctly. I'm sure it is, but let's just double check here before we start building our 3 different responsive designs. So here's what I'm going to do. It's really simple. I've saved up the HTML file, right, at the end of the previous exercise. I'm going to head into styles.css. Hopefully you still have this guy kicking around. You might have to go and reopen them. And here's what I'm going to do inside this guy. This guy doesn't contain any code yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in the following: body, no angle brackets here, just body, space, and then in curly quotes or squiggly quotes, let me zoom in one more time so you can see what I'm doing here. I'm going to type in the following: background, full colon, space, and I'm going to type in blue followed by a semicolon. So what I'm saying here is that I want the background of the body container inside our HTML file to be blue. Okay? Go ahead and save up your external style sheet. Do you still have your file opened up inside your web browser? I hope so. Maybe you did indeed type in your first name. What I'd like you to do is refresh your browser. Just hit your refresh icon. You should get a lovely blue background, something like this. So this confirms that the external style sheet is indeed connected to the HTML file. Actually, sorry, I should say that the other way around. The HTML file is connected to the external style sheet. Now, what we want to have happen here, just bear with me for a second. What we want to have happen is we want to set it up so that we can scale our browser to different resolutions. The 3 resolutions that you and I have targeted for our 3 devices. Don't forget, we said 480 pixels and lower. That's our low resolution. The medium resolution, don't forget, would be 481 pixels to 1023 pixels. That's the medium resolution. And then the high resolution we defined as being anything higher than 1024 pixels. Okay? So we want to be able to scale our browser window and see some changes happening inside the browser window. Okay? So what we're going to do next is we're going to set up our 3 devices. This is called setting up media queries, and they're all going to happen inside the external style sheet. Okay, so this is where things really start getting good. So here we go. We're going to go and create our 3 media queries. All right, the moment of truth is upon us here. We are going to set up our 3 media queries, as they are referred to, inside our external style sheet. Okay, so if you're taking notes, you may want to get yourself ready here. This is going to be really good stuff. Now, just to make sure we're all on the same page, what's going to happen here, and this is so extraordinarily cool, it's kind of hard to actually express or put into words, because really, before the advent of CSS3, pulling off this sort of stuff was a real challenge. What we're going to do here is we're going to set up our external style sheet to detect the resolution of the device that's being used to view the HTML page. Okay? You may want to jot that down. So once again, the CSS file is going to detect the resolution of the device that's being used to view, in our case, index.html. Okay? So that's the deal. Okay? So all of the good stuff is going to happen inside the external style sheet. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to give myself a little bit of extra room here inside my file just by hitting enter a couple of times. We're going to set up 3 media queries, 1 for each of our devices. So here's the first one. Here's what we're going to type in. I'm going to type in the @ symbol. Okay? So that would be Shift 2. And I'm going to say media space only space screen space and, okay, hopefully you're still with me. And then after and, I'm going to throw in a space, and I'm going to throw in a pair of, I'll call them regular brackets or curvy brackets, okay? And what I'm going to type into the regular curvy brackets is the following: maximum width, or max dash width. If I can spell width, there we go. And then I'll put in full colon space 480 pixels, okay, px. So it's going to be at media only screen and then in brackets, max dash width, full colon space, 480 px, followed by the closing bracket or the closing parentheses there. Okay, perfect. After the closing parentheses, I'm going to throw in a space and I'm going to stick in a pair of, I lovingly call them squiggly brackets or curly brackets. Perfect. That's the first media query. Now, how this low-resolution media query is going to work is we're going to throw all of the CSS rules that we want to use when the device's width is 480 pixels or lower. That's why we're using a maximum width of 480 pixels. We're going to throw all of those CSS rules into these curly or squiggly brackets. Okay? That's the deal. That's how it works. And we're going to test this in just a moment after we get our 3 media queries placed. So this is the first media query. I hope that went okay for you. As you can see, it's not too difficult to type them out here. So we can go max width, or we can also use minimum width. We're going to use minimum width for the second media query. So check this out. I'm just going to hit enter a couple more times here. And here's what I'm going to type in now for the medium resolution media query. I'm going to type in an @ symbol once again, media space only space screen space and space once again. So hopefully you're writing all this out if you're taking notes. Now inside the regular brackets or the curvy brackets, I'm going to type in min dash width. Again, if I could get my sausage fingers cooperating. There we go. Min width full colon space. So I'm going to say, all right, I want to create a media query that's going to be applied to a device that's running a minimum width of 481 pixels. Okay, do you follow how that works? So rather than going with a maximum width, we're using a minimum width. Don't forget to close your curvy bracket, your regular bracket, and then go ahead and throw in a pair of curly brackets or squiggly brackets. So we've got max width, 480 pixels. We're about to insert a ruler 2 into his curvy brackets or squiggly brackets. Then we have a second media query for our minimum width of 481 pixels. And of course, we'll go and throw in some CSS rules into his curly brackets in just a little bit. All right, we have one more media query to go. I hope this is working for you. I hope it's making sense. Here's what I'm going to type in. I'm going to go @ media once again. And if I could spell media, there we go. And then only screen and, watch your spaces there. You got to have spaces in between each. And then inside my brackets, I'm going to go minimum dash width. There we are. Full colon space 1024. So I'm just harking back to my cheat notes, looking at what we had defined as low resolution, medium resolution, and of course, high resolution as well. I'm going to go ahead and throw in a pair of curly brackets or squiggly brackets for the high resolution as well. So there we go. If it's not really making a whole lot of sense, bear with me. And as we start making our way through the upcoming lessons, I think things will really start clicking for you. All right, good stuff. So we have the 3 media queries created. I am very anxious to go and test the 3 media queries. Let's go and check that out. As I said just a moment ago, if things aren't really clicking for you, if things aren't really making a whole lot of sense, I think things will really start coming together for you in just a short period of time. Just bear with me here. So what I want to do in this exercise is I want to test to make sure that our 3 media queries are indeed functioning. So earlier on, we tested our external style sheet to make sure that he was connecting up properly, which he was, which is great. So now we want to take the testing one step further and make sure that our 3 media queries are indeed functioning. Now, I'm going to set this up in a very simple way. The test that we're going to run is going to be really, really straightforward. Up towards the top of the external style sheet, we have that background, the background color of blue being set for the body. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to select all of that code from the opening B in body all the way across to the closing curly bracket, the closing squiggly bracket, and I'm going to cut that, okay? And if you have a couple of extra lines of space, you can get rid of that as well, okay? Now here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to find each media query's set of curly brackets or pair of curly brackets, and I'm going to paste that background into the media query itself, okay, like so. So here's the test that I'm going to run. If the device is running a resolution of 480 pixels or lower, then I want the background color of the body of my HTML page to appear in blue. Okay, that's what I've set up here. If the device that is viewing the HTML file is running a minimum width of 481 pixels, then I want the background color of the body to be, let's say, green. How's that? And I want that green background color to be applied for all of the devices that are running 480 pixels or lower, unless they're running a resolution of 1024 or higher. Okay, are you still with me? Okay, so I'm going to change his background color to, let's say, red. Now, one other thing that I want to change here, I realized earlier on I made a minor typo. I typed in mid-width rather than min-width, M-I-N. Okay, so my mistake there. So this is a very, very simple test, as you can see, to make sure that the three media queries are indeed functioning correctly. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and save up my external style sheet. I'm going to flip back over to my browser and I'm going to refresh. I'm just going to hit Control or Command R on my keyboard to refresh. Okay. Now, just so you know what's happening here, the resolution that I'm currently running on my computer is 1024 pixels in width by 768 pixels in height. So there I'm getting the red background coming through, which is great. Now, how the heck am I going to test the other devices? Well, I guess I could plug my tablet into my laptop and, test it that way, or maybe upload all of this to a live web server and then pull out my smartphone, something like that. Definitely, I could try that. Or what we can do for the sake of time and for the sake of simplicity is we can simply resize our browser window. As soon as I grab my browser window and start to resize them, the background color changes from red to green, because now the overall width of my browser window is less than 1024 pixels. Okay, great. So that is functioning for me. I know that my high resolution media query and my medium resolution media query are working, which is great. Okay, I'm going to continue scaling this guy down all the way down until I see blue. There's the breakpoint going from 480 pixels to 481 pixels. So from the low resolution to the medium resolution, and of course medium resolution to high resolution, right? So there you go. There's a really easy way to go about testing your three media queries, okay? Now, if you wouldn't mind, I'd prefer doing something a little bit more interesting than just changing the background color. Obviously, what we want to do here is we want to set it up so that we have our three designs that we've been working so hard on. We want to actually have them apply depending on the dimensions of the device that are being used to view the layout. Okay, so this is a kind of a down and dirty way, a simple way that we can go about changing our device, changing or flipping between our media queries. In the real world, this works beautifully. This works really, really well. I've done this myself quite a number of times. The other thing that I wanted to mention, though, is that I do indeed want to eventually get my design loaded onto a live web server, and I'm going to pull out my smartphone, I'm going to pull out a tablet and go to the live site itself to see it behaving on an actual device. Okay, so keep that in the back of your mind as well. So if I flip back over to my external style sheet, the three media queries are functioning beautifully, which is great. Now I have a couple of techniques that I want to bounce off you for simplifying the external style sheet even further to help you keep track of exactly what's going on. So I hope you were able to get your three media queries happening, and I hope you were able to test them, and I hope everything's working wonderfully on your side. This is really, really cool stuff. What I want to do here in this exercise, as I had mentioned just a moment ago, is I want to bounce a couple of techniques off of you just for simplifying everything here, because this does look a little bit complicated here. And it's only going to get more complex as we begin adding in more and more CSS rules to control our HTML structure, our HTML page. Okay, so in an effort to keep things nice and simple, nice and easy to follow, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to bring my cursor all the way up to the top of my external style sheet. I'm going to make use of CSS commenting to help me keep track of what's what. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go /*. This is how we type in a CSS comment. And I'm going to type in low resolution. And then maybe I'll do something like comma space. And then maybe some kind of a reminder note for myself. 480 px and below. Okay, something like that. And then I'll go, maybe I'll throw in a space there, and then */ something like this. So this comment here, this green comment as it appears in Coda for myself, relates to this guy here. And then maybe what I'll do is I'll drop my cursor between the low and the medium resolution media query, and maybe I'll hit enter maybe once or twice just to space them apart a little bit. And then I'll do something like this, / medium, you get the idea here, resolution, and then comma space, and then maybe I'll do something like, let's see here, 481 px to 1023 px. Again, just to remind myself, I try to do myself favors like this. When I come back to this in 6 months, I might not remember exactly how I set everything up, right? So I try to leave myself little notes, little descriptions of what I've done. Let's do this one more time for the high resolution. So once again, / and then asterisk, and then we'll go high resolution. And if I could spell resolution, there we go. And I'm going to say 1024 pixels and above. Okay, how's that? You can, of course, phrase this in any way that you like. Okay, all right, there we go. That makes things a little bit easier to follow. The other thing that I want to do is I want to break apart my media queries just a little bit. I said this earlier on, but I'll repeat it again. All of the CSS rules that we're going to have for each of the media queries are going to reside within that media query's pair of curly brackets. Okay, so each media query, as it stands right now, has one CSS rule, of course, the body with the background color. Okay, so what I'm going to do, just to try and, again, sort of in an effort to keep things simplified, is I'm going to drop my cursor just before body, and I'm going to hit enter, maybe once, maybe twice, something like this. And then what I'll do is I'll bring my cursor just before the closing squiggly bracket. Now this gets a little tricky because we have the closing squiggly bracket for the CSS rule, okay, which contains all of the properties, and then we have the closing squiggly bracket for the media query itself. Okay, so make sure you're in front of the correct squiggly bracket, the outermost squiggly bracket, and maybe once again I'll hit enter a couple of times. Something like this, and then maybe I'll space apart my media queries, something like that. Okay, so all of the new CSS rules that I'm going to be creating are going to be going right alongside the existing CSS rule that we have for each of our media queries. Okay, now you don't have to do this, but I find that this makes it a little bit easier to sort of visually understand and sort of visually distinguish between all of my media queries. Okay, so I'm just going to repeat that for my other media queries, my medium resolution and my high resolution. There we go, something like this. And by the way, the changes that we've made here have no impact on what's going on inside the browser, so there's no worries there. So this is how I like to try and keep myself organized with my CSS media queries. All right, we have our 3 media queries in place. We're ready to now move forward and build out the HTML structure. Okay, so once again, how it's going to work is we're going to have a single HTML document, which is going to contain all the building blocks, if you will, for our layout, which we've been working so hard on inside Photoshop, of course. And it's the external style sheet containing the 3 media queries that's going to adjust those building blocks for us. Okay, so what we're going to do in this next series of exercises is set up these HTML building blocks. Okay, now if you want, you don't have to do this, but if you want, you could have Photoshop running in the background. Here I've got my high resolution layout just as a reference. Okay, so we're going to build out this structure using, of course, HTML elements, HTML building blocks. And what I'm going to do here, and I think this is a very contemporary way to do this, is we're going to use HTML5 building blocks. Okay, so here's how it's all going to go down. I'm going to head back to my coding application, and I'm going to head into my index.html file, okay, where I had previously inserted my name, which we can go ahead and get rid of. So what I'm going to do right off the bat, if you've never done this sort of stuff before, I'll try and go easy on you here, but there's going to be a little bit of typing here. What I want to do is I want to insert what's referred to as a header element. So this is an HTML5 element. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in open angle bracket, HEADER. Okay, and then close angle bracket. And then once again, my coding application, Coda, goes ahead and inserts the closing header tag for me, which is great. Okay, now this header element, this guy here, is going to serve as the header back inside the Photoshop layout. So he eventually is going to contain our logo as well. Okay. As a matter of fact, maybe what I'll do is I'll zoom in on my layout here just a little bit so we can kind of track this as we go. All right, now directly beneath the header, of course, we have our main navigation menu. So here's how I'm going to build the main navigation menu over inside my code. I'm going to drop my cursor just below the header, and I'm going to go ahead and type in open angle bracket nav, close angle bracket, and then make sure to close this guy off as well, open angle bracket / nav, close angle bracket. This is a second HTML5 element that we have available. They're available to us, so we may as well make use of them. So let's see. I'm going to move my cursor down maybe a line or so. As a matter of fact, let me space things apart here just so you can see how this is all coming together here. This is all going inside the body element, of course, right? All right, now if I head back to Photoshop, the next main layout component that we have is going to be the slideshow. Now, there's no HTML element for a slideshow. We have the header, we have the nav. There's nothing in HTML called slideshow. So here's what I'm going to do instead. I'm going to make use of what's referred to as a div. And if you've never worked with divs before, think of it as a giant rectangle. And we can control the dimensions and even the positioning of that rectangle. So here's how to code it in. I'm going to go open angle bracket div. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually assign an ID to this div. Sit tight here if you're not sure exactly what I'm doing. I'm going to go open angle bracket div space ID equals, and then in quotes, slideshow. Okay? All lowercase, no spaces. And then after the closing quote, I'm going to go close angle bracket. And then I also, once again, want to make sure that I'm going to close that div off. Now, just to slow down just for a second, just to make sure we're all on the same page, this thing called an ID is eventually going to wind up as a CSS rule. So we're going to have to go and create what's referred to as an ID selector inside our external style sheet called slideshow, which we'll get to in just a little bit. I hope that is working for you. I'm going to head back over to Photoshop. And let's see, I'll scroll down here a little bit. Next, we have our 3 content boxes, okay? So once again, in HTML5, there's no such thing as content box, this sort of thing. So once again, I'm going to have to make it up using a div, okay? Now, I'm going to change it up slightly here for you. Here's what I'm going to do this time. I'm going to go open angle bracket div, just like we did a moment ago. And then this time, I'm going to go class equals, and then in quotes, content box. Okay, make sure that's in quotes, and then close the angle bracket, and then go ahead and close your div. Now I'm going with something called a class now, which you might know about. This is a different kind of CSS selector. I want to have a total of 3 content boxes inside my layout, of course, as we've built not only for the high resolution, but also for the medium and the low resolution designs that we've been working on. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take the code that you and I had typed out here inside our HTML document, and I'm going to copy it, and then I'll paste it twice, just like so, okay, for a total of 3 content boxes, okay? All right, we are almost there. We're almost finished the main structure for our document. I'm going to move down just below the last content box, if I flip back over to my document, then we get into our news feed where we have our article titles and some placeholder text for each of our news items, right? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make use of an HTML5 element called article. Okay, so I have 4 of them in here, so I'm going to go and insert 4 articles into my HTML code. Okay, so quite literally open angle bracket article, close angle bracket, and then make sure to close your article, just like that. Okay, and again, we need 4 of them in total, so I'm just going to grab this fella and copy him, and then very simply just paste him out. So I have a total of 4 of them. That's it. That's all there is to it. And then, of course, last but not least, if I head back to Photoshop, we have our footer way down at the bottom. Okay, and we have an HTML5 element called footer, so why don't we make use of them? So way down at the bottom of my code here, I'm going to go open angle bracket, F-O-O-T-R, close angle bracket, and then be sure to close your footer as well. That's it. This is the very, very raw structure, all of the building blocks that are necessary for rebuilding what we've created, what we've been working so hard on inside Photoshop, now inside the world of code. All right, I hope you have all of your main building blocks now in place. It might not look like a whole lot at this stage of the game, but eventually all of this is going to become this, what we have here inside Photoshop, over inside the browser. Now, just out of interest here, if you wanted to, what you could do is you could save up all of your work here, Controller Command S, and then head back over to your web browser. I hope you still have that guy open. And you could refresh Controller Command R if you want, or you could hit your refresh button way up towards the top. And there's no changes here. There's no changes inside the browser other than my name disappearing. Now, if you're not sure why, it's because we have the building blocks in place, but we have no instructions assigned to the building blocks just yet. We haven't told the header that it should be, for instance, 960 pixels in width by 130 pixels in height. We haven't told the navigation bar to have a black background and so on, all that good stuff. All that stuff's coming up. So we're going to get to all that stuff. Now, before we move forward though, what I want to do is I want to take just a quick moment and I want to wrap the entire layout, everything that we've built here, inside a parent div, if that makes sense. So in other words, imagine taking all this code and putting it inside a box. Okay, that's exactly what I want to do. This is something that I always do with all of my layouts. It makes the controlling of the overall layout a heck of a lot easier. So if you're not really sure what I'm talking about, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to bring my cursor just above header. Okay, maybe I'll give myself a little bit of additional white space just to show you what's going on here. And I'm going to open up a div. Okay, so again, another rectangular object, open angle bracket div. Now, very much like we saw earlier with the slideshow, I'm going to use an ID selector for this guy. So it's going to go open angle bracket div space ID equals, and then I always call this guy master. Okay, and he has to be contained inside quotes. Okay, so ID equals open quote master close angle bracket. Now, once again, Coda is helping me out by sticking in the closing div tag, which is very helpful, but I said that I wanted to take all of the existing code and wrap it inside this master div. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this closing div tag and I'm going to cut him, Controller Command X, of course, and I'm going to move him all the way down to the bottom of the code just below footer. Okay, below footer, but before the closing body and the closing HTML tags. So perhaps somewhere in here. And essentially what that does is that takes everything that you and I inserted in the previous exercise and encloses it inside this thing called the master div. Okay, and this is going to make things like centering the layout a heck of a lot easier. All right, great. That's all we wanted to achieve inside this exercise. Make sure to save up your document, and then we can move forward and continue building out the building blocks for our HTML code. Okay, now next what we want to do is we want to build out the structure for our main navigation menu. Okay. Now, just before we do that, just a quick look at my code here. What I did here, and I hope this makes things a little bit easier for you, is I spaced things apart a little bit for you. So I threw in a little bit of space there above the slideshow and above and below the content boxes and so on, just to try and break it up for you visually inside the code view. This is just fine if you want to do something like this, but in the real world, we want to start to collapse a lot of this white space. So really, this is more for instructional purposes, I guess. More importantly, though, it's our main navigation menu that we're after, that we want to go and build now. So go ahead and find your nav element, your nav HTML5 element, and go ahead and drop your cursor in between your two nav tags there, the opening and the closing nav tag there. And I'm just going to hit enter a couple of times. There we go, something like this. Now, this is going to require quite a bit of code to get this to work. I want to get started here by typing out the actual menu items themselves, which of course we already set up over inside Photoshop. Okay, so let's try and zip through this fairly quickly because we already know what our main navigation items are. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to type in home and I'll hit enter. The experience, there we are, being careful not to make typos, tickets and rates, and we have our location. All right, there we go. Online store, we're getting there. Visitor comments, there we are, and contact us, okay? And again, if you want, you could refer back to your layout inside Photoshop if you want. So we just retyped out all these guys, okay? I suppose we could have copied and pasted them out of our Photoshop layer. But in any regard, there we go. There's our main navigation items. All right. Now, where it starts to get a little bit more confusing, a little bit more involved, a little bit more intricate, is we want each of these guys to be a bulleted list item. Okay. I know that sounds kind of wacky if you've never done this sort of thing before, but our main navigation menu is actually going to be a list, a bulleted list. Okay. But it's not going to look like a bulleted list. It's going to look like a navigation menu. So here's what I'm going to do. Above the list of menu items, I'm going to type in open angle bracket UL for unordered list, or what you and I would call a bulleted list. And then this closing UL tag, I'm going to move that guy just by cutting them and pasting them down towards the bottom of the list of items that we have there, just like that. Great, perfect. All right, now the next thing that I want to do is I want to set it up so that each of our items is what's referred to as a list item inside our unordered list. Okay, so before the first guy here, home, I'm going to go open angle bracket LI, close angle bracket. That's a list item, okay? And then after home, I'm going to have to close that list item by going open angle bracket /LI, close angle bracket, just like that. Okay, so we need to do that for each of these guys, okay? Luckily, through the magic of copying and pasting, we can speed this up some. So go ahead and grab your opening list item tag there, and I'm just going to copy them, Control-Command-C, and I'm just going to go ahead and paste them in front of each of my menu items like so. And then I'll do the exact same thing for the closing tag. Grab him and copy him from home, and then paste him after each of the other main navigation menu items, just like that. All right, so things are starting to shape up here. Now, the other thing that I want to do, and there's going to be a little bit more HTML here, the other thing that I want to do is I want to make these list items or these menu items clickable, because in the real world, they would actually take us to subpages inside our website, right? So we'd have a page called The Experience. We'd have a page called Visitor Comments and so on. So I want to make these guys clickable, but we actually haven't gone and created any subpages, not yet anyway. So what I'm going to do is, this is kind of a neat little trick that you can do, is I'm going to set these guys up to give the appearance and the formatting and the illusion of a hyperlink, but they're actually not going to go anywhere. This is called a null link, by the way. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop my cursor before the H in home. I'm going to go open angle bracket A space href. Okay, this is how we code a hyperlink. Equals, and then in quotes, I'm going to put in a number sign or a hash mark, just like that. Okay, and then don't forget to close your angle bracket. That turns home into a hyperlink. But I've got to close that hyperlink by dropping my cursor after the word home, and then I'm going to go open angle bracket /A close angle bracket. All right, so now home is going to behave as if it were a hyperlink, but because we've set it to a hash mark or a number sign, it's not actually going to take us anywhere. So we have to go and repeat that now for all of our remaining list items. So once again, through the magic of copying and pasting, I'm just going to quickly go and duplicate this out, something like this. Okay, there we are. And I'm going to go and close off each of my hyperlinks as well. Got to remember to do that. Again, just copying and pasting here. Okay, so as you can see, it does take a little bit to get the entire navigation menu structure in place. We have the unordered list. Each of our menu items is a list item, and then each of our list items is also a dummy link or a null link. All right, now if you want to save up your work and go and take a look at your browser, it isn't very exciting at all. If you go and refresh, there's all of your navigation menu items. They're all appearing inside a bulleted list vertically, and they're all blue and underlined, suggesting that they are all hyperlinks. And of course, my cursor changes to the pointer there when I move my mouse over top of them. Okay, so there we go. We're getting started. We're getting there. There's a little bit more in terms of the structure for our HTML that we've got to look after before we can start getting into some CSS and the formatting of our HTML. So let's keep moving. All right, now next we have, after our main navigation menu, we have our slideshow, which of course is going to contain an image, and we're going to get to working with images, graphics, and so on in just a little while. So I'm going to skip the slideshow and head down to the next area, which is going to be the 3 content boxes that we have inside our layout. Now, once again, just as a reference, I'm going to flip back over to Photoshop. So there's the slideshow, of course. Scroll past that guy. Now, the 3 content boxes, of course, are going to be, at least with the high resolution, appearing all on one row, with some placeholder text in them, as well as some images and some header text. Okay, so I'm not going to worry about the header text or the photos for now, but the placeholder text we can go and insert in terms of the raw structure for our document. So give me a second. I'm going to head all the way back over to my coding application here, Coda. I'm going to go and find my first content box, okay? And we want to go and drop in our placeholder text, our lorem ipsum text, into the content box. So give me a second here. I'm just going to head all the way down to my desktop, into my work files folder, and of course, there we have our lorem.txt. Go ahead and open that guy up, and we'll grab his content there, copy it, Control-Command-C, back over to index.html, and I'm going to paste in the lorem text into each of my content boxes. But before I paste the content in, if I drop my cursor back into the first content box div, I want to make sure that this text actually appears inside a paragraph. Okay, so I'm going to quickly throw in an HTML paragraph by typing in open angle bracket P, close angle bracket, and I should wind up with this here. So open angle bracket P, close angle bracket, and then the closing tag, open angle bracket / P, close angle bracket. Okay, and it's inside the paragraph where I'm going to go and paste in the lorem ipsum placeholder text, like so. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the placeholder text as well as the paragraph element itself. Okay, so basically from the opening paragraph tag there all the way down to the closing paragraph tag, grab all of that and copy it, Control-Command-C, and then I'm going to go and paste that into the other 2 content box divs like that. All right, perfect. That's all we need to do here, okay? And again, we're just filling out the raw building blocks, the raw structure. So once again, if I head back over to my browser, I'm going to be disappointed because it looks pretty lame at this point. Nothing like we have over inside Photoshop, okay? But in any regard, there we go. There's our 3 content boxes, which is nice. All right, now next we have our 4 articles that we've got to go and structure out or build out. Let's go and look after them. All right, now the 4 articles. This is going to require a little bit of structuring on our part as well, but it shouldn't be too bad. Nothing like the main navigation menu. But we are going to make use of a variety of HTML elements, HTML building blocks to achieve the result that we're after. So what we're going to do here, by the way, is we're going to set up one of these guys, and then we'll just copy it and paste them out just to speed things up. Okay, so go ahead and find your first article there. I'm going to drop my cursor inside that article, and I'll hit enter a couple of times just to open this guy up a little bit. And let's see here. I'm going to start off with the headline. If I flip back over to Photoshop just for a second, of course, we have the article title headline, right? And then beneath that, we have a paragraph of placeholder text, right? So what I'm going to do to pull this off is I'm going to make use of the H2 HTML element. So I'm going to go open angle bracket, H2, closed angle bracket. And then again, make sure to close your H2 like so. And then inside that H2, I'm just going to type in article title. There we go. Just like that. Okay, so that's going to be the title for our article as we see over inside Photoshop. And then beneath the article title, we need that placeholder text once again. Thankfully, we already have it inside our code here, so I'm just going to go and swipe it from one of the content boxes there. Make sure you grab the paragraph tags there as well. We want to make sure that this guy's enclosed inside an HTML paragraph. So I'm just going to copy that and then paste it out just like that. Now, last but not least, what I want to do here is I want to take the entire contents of the article, so the H2 and the paragraph, and I want to wrap it inside a div. So here's what I'm going to do, and this is going to help us control the spacing, by the way, inside our news feed. So here's what I'm going to do. Just above the H2, I'm going to go open angle bracket div. All right, now we've seen this a couple of times already. I'm going to make use of a class, so I'm going to go class equals, and then in quotes, I'm just going to call this news, all in lowercase. All right, and then, of course, closing the angle bracket. Now, this closing div tag that gets inserted for me, I'm going to cut them, and I'm going to move them all the way down to, well, just above the closing article tag, something like that. Okay, so in other words, the H2 and the paragraph are now contained or enclosed inside a news div container, if that makes sense for you. All right, wonderful, good stuff. So give me a moment here. I'm just going to collapse some of the white space that we have here just to sort of close things up a little bit. Now we need 4 of these guys in total. Let's speed it up by grabbing everything that we've been working on here. So from the opening article tag all the way down to the closing article tag, and of course all of the content there. And I'm going to copy that guy and I'm going to paste him out, replacing my previous inserted articles like so. Okay, just for the sake of saving a little bit of time there. There we go, something like this. Go ahead and save up your work. Again, if you want, you can check out your browser, flip over to your browser and refresh Control or Command R or your refresh icon up at the top. Again, it looks pretty gnarly, doesn't it? But it's structure, right? We're getting the structure in place, of course. And you know what? We're in the home stretch because there's only one more piece of structure that we need to insert here, and that is the structure for our footer. All right, the footer, the final remaining structural area that we have to work on inside our HTML. Do you remember what the structure looks like? Let's head back to Photoshop here. There's the structure for the footer. As a matter of fact, don't forget the footer is pretty much exactly the same as our main navigation menu, at least for myself. Maybe you adjusted yours a little bit, but that's what I'm going to go with here, okay? Now, you might be thinking to yourself, oh man, we have to code all that stuff out again. Remember the bulleted list and all the list items and the null links, everything that we had done earlier. Well, you know what? I'm going to simply copy and paste what we've already built. Okay, so we're going to keep things nice and short and sweet here and then move on to some CSS. Now, what I'm going to do here is I just want to space things apart here before we do the copy and paste. I'm going to drop my cursor into the footer, of course, inside index.html. And I'll just give myself a little bit of white space once again to work inside, something like this, okay? And let's see, I'm going to scroll all the way back up towards the top, and I'm going to grab the entire nav element, the entire nav building block itself, and of course all of the content that it contains. Okay, so make sure you're grabbing your open nav tag there all the way down to the closing nav tag, all the list items, all of the menu items, the null links, the whole 9 yards. Copy it, and then let's scroll down and paste them into the footer area inside our document. Okay, so your footer, in other words, should contain a nav. Okay, just like that. All right, and we're going to use that to our advantage in just a little bit. Congratulations. The structure, the building of the HTML structure is complete. Go ahead and save your document and cringe as you refresh your browser. We wind up with something like this. Okay, so now I'm getting my list way down at the bottom there, and my background color has changed. I'm really not too concerned about that. We're going to go and adjust our CSS in just a little bit, but there's our main structure now complete. So now we can go after our CSS. All right, we are ready for some CSS. We have the structure for our HTML document in place, all of the building blocks. We're now ready to start formatting those building blocks. Now, you know what? Before we move forward, I really have to address something that's been nagging at me since the end of the previous exercise, where I went to Chrome and refreshed and I got a green background. And I thought, at the time I was like, okay, I'm not really too concerned about the background. But then I got thinking about it afterwards and I went, there shouldn't be a green background. It should be a red background, because if I flip over to my external style sheet, I'm looking at my document in a high-resolution browser, so I should be getting a red background, as we can see is being dictated from my high-resolution media query inside the external style sheet. I hope that makes sense. So I'm looking at Chrome here, and I'm refreshing Chrome, and I'm getting this green background. I'm going, what the heck's going on? So then I thought, all right, I'm going to check the same page inside Safari, and sure enough, there's a red background. And I thought, all right, I'm going to check it inside Firefox, and there's my red background as well. So I suspect something very bizarre is going on with my particular installation of Chrome. Something's going on here. So I think maybe what I'll do is I'll switch out for either Firefox or Safari. So the only reason why I'm bringing this up is just in case you happen to be getting some weirdness on your side as well. And if you can't resolve it, try clearing your browsing data, try clearing your cache, things like that. It could very likely be a cache issue, okay? Now, more importantly, I don't really care about red backgrounds and green backgrounds. What I really care about is making sure that my media query is functioning correctly, and I thought maybe I structured it incorrectly. I double-checked. Everything was working fine, so it all boiled down to a browser issue. All right, now, more importantly, we want to start working on this high-resolution media query. I hope you're excited to dive into this stuff. Now, as ironic as this may be, finally getting our red background to work, we're actually going to get rid of the red background. I really wanted to make sure that the media query was functioning correctly. So, in other words, just to take a step backwards for a second, the HTML structure is complete. So we want to keep this guy handy, but we now want to start working on the CSS that's going to control that structure specifically for our high-resolution device. Okay, so go ahead and find your body inside your high-resolution media query, and we're going to change out his background color, even though we finally got it to work. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to specify an RGB background color. So it's still going to be background full colon space, but this time I'm going to go RGB, and then inside regular brackets or curvy brackets, whatever you want to call them there, I'm going to go 244, 244, 244 for our background color. And I'm going to save this up. I'm going to head back to one of my browsers, or perhaps both of my browsers, and refresh. And we should get sort of this light gray background color, something like this. Okay? That is, of course, until I start scaling the browser window down to the other media queries, of course, where we're going to get those other background colors. There we go. So I wasn't getting this to function inside Chrome, and I thought it was something to do with my media queries. Turns out, again, browser issue. All right. Now, the other thing that I want to do here, just before we move on to the next exercise, is I want to get a little bit of housekeeping looked after. If I refer back to my HTML document for a moment, don't forget that we took everything that we had built and we enclosed it inside this thing called a master or a master div. Okay, so let's go and create our master div. Now, what I want the master div to do is I want him to center align the layout, at least inside the high resolution layout, and perhaps we'll throw in some additional formatting as well. Don't forget, he's an ID selector. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to head back to my external style sheet, and I'm going to make sure that I'm inside my high resolution media query. So in other words, being careful to drop my cursor inside that media query's curly brackets. So perhaps right in here, maybe I'll give myself an extra line of space. You can see what I'm typing a little bit more clearly. And I'm going to go number sign master. And then in the squiggly brackets, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go width, full colon space, 960px. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a fixed width layout for the high resolution device, 960 pixels. Okay. The other thing that I want to do, I said this just a moment ago, is I want this guy to be centered inside the browser window. Here's how we're going to do it. We're going to use something called margin. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a little bit of CSS shorthand here as well. I'm going to say margin top and bottom, nothing, 0. Margin left and right, I want to be auto, followed by a semicolon. So in other words, I want the master div itself to automatically figure out how much space it should have on the left and also on the right-hand sides. Okay? All right, good stuff. Let's see here. After the semicolon, let's go and throw in a border on this guy. Now, again, this is a little bit of CSS shorthand here for us. The width of the border is going to be a pixel, just 1 pixel, pretty thin border. The line style is going to be a solid line. The color, I'm going to specify using RGB color values, which is going to be black, 0, 0, 0. Okay? And don't forget to throw in your semicolon on the end. Okay? And then last but not least, I want to throw in a background color. So I'm going to go background, full colon space, RGB once again, and I'm going to run out of line space here, but it's going to be 255, 255, 255 for white. Okay, there we go. Perfect. That's it. That's all we want to do here for this exercise. Go ahead and save up your work. Head back to a functioning browser if you can, and go ahead and refresh. And you should wind up with something like this. So you can see now that everything indented slightly on the left and right-hand sides. I have a border all the way around. And of course, if I go and resize this browser window, we're going to break into the other media query. And it looks like, again, I'm getting my browser not functioning here. I'm suspecting that it's a caching issue that's going on here, at least for myself. Let me check my other browser where we have some critical errors happening here. I'll go and refresh this. There we go, something like that. All right, that's what we're after. Okay, good stuff. There, that's what I'm after. This type of behavior. Okay, good stuff. Now that we have the rough structure in place, we can start working on our header, our navigation menu, our slideshow, and so on. Let's go and get that done. All right, we're ready for the remainder of the high-resolution layout. Now, I should have explained this in the previous exercise. What we're after here is simply getting a little bit of formatting, basic wireframe formatting, applied to our HTML blocks before we actually apply the full-on formatting that we have here inside Photoshop. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. We want to make sure that everything functions properly. We want to get all the wrinkles worked out, which obviously I'm encountering some wrinkles here, but it's all part of the process, right? So we want to get the wireframe formatting, if you will, applied first, make sure that everything functions correctly, which I have things functioning correctly here now inside Safari, which is great. And then we'll actually go through the process of applying formatting, which is going to be really, really easy and straightforward after we get through sort of this quick run through of formatting, if you will. So, as always, I think what I'll do here is I'll take a top-down approach. In this exercise, we will go after the header for our high-resolution layout. Okay, so we already have the master in place. We can see the master inside our browser, which is great. I'm going to click just after the master, and I'll hit enter a couple of times. Now, if you want, you can refer back to your HTML document. This is why I suggested keeping this guy kicking around in the background. Because after the master, of course, we have the header, and the header is, of course, an HTML5 element, okay? So that's obviously important to remember or important to know so that we know what to go and do inside our external style sheet, okay? So here's what I'm going to do. So this is, again, inside the high-resolution media query. I'm going to type in header, just like so, because it's an HTML element. I don't need to precede it with a period or a hash mark or a number sign or anything like this. Just the name of the HTML element itself, header in our case, okay? And then inside his squiggly brackets, we can go and throw in our formatting. So here we go. The width for this guy is going to be 960 pixels, all right? The height on this fella is going to be 130 pixels. Okay, there we go. And all I want to do is I want to throw on a background. And in my case, what I'm going to do, because we're sort of in this wireframe mode, if you will, is I'm going to throw in a temporary gray background color. So we're going to go RGB, and then in brackets, I'm going to go 200, 200, 200. Okay, and don't forget to throw in your semicolon on the end. Go ahead and save up your work and head back to a browser, whichever browser you're using. Go ahead and refresh, and there we go. There's our header now in place, okay? Now, if you've never done this sort of thing before, this is what I meant earlier on. So earlier on, we got the building block header in place, but there was no structure for header. It was just a placeholder building block, if you will. Now what's happening is the CSS is saying, all right, I want you to span right across the entire width of the layout, 960 pixels, and I want you to be 130 pixels in height, and I want you to have a gray background color. And the header, the HTML5 element, simply says, okay, so I'll be, I'll have this gray background color, I'll be 130 pixels in height and 960 pixels in width. Okay, this is really the power of contemporary web design. This is what it's all about, okay? All right, now with the header in place there, at least in a basic form, in a wireframe form, we can now go after the main navigation menu and make the main navigation menu look like a main navigation menu rather than a series of bulleted items. Now, in this exercise, we're actually going to be going after two things. We're obviously going to be going after the menu items themselves, but there's the nav element that we want to go after as well. Okay, so let me show you this over inside our index.html file. So we're going to go after these guys, these list items here, but we're also going to go after this fella, the nav element. Okay, and as a matter of fact, I'm going to start things off with the nav element. Okay, so of course I'm going to head back to my external style sheet, styles.css. Just after header, I'm going to go ahead and throw in a couple of extra spaces here, more so that you can see what I'm doing here. And here's what I'm going to do. NAV. Again, it's an HTML5 element, so I don't need to precede it with anything, just the element itself, nav. And let's see, I'm going to throw some structure onto this guy, width 960. That's pixels, of course. And I'm going to throw a height onto this guy as well, 35 pixels. Now, if I refer back to the Photoshop layout, this guy's background is black, and that's something that I am going to set right now, okay? So to do that in CSS, I'm just going to go background, :space, and I'm going to be using RGB color values for all of this. I'm using some CSS3. So the RGB color values is going to be the following here, 0, 0, 0. Okay, that's going to give us pure black. Okay, follow that by a semicolon. I have a little bit of padding that I want to use on this guy. If you're not sure what padding is, it's the spacing on the inside of the object, or in our case, the inside of our navigation menu. And here's what I'm going to do. This is going to be some more CSS shorthand here. I'm going to go 2 pixels. That's for the top. For the right, it's going to be 0. For the bottom, it's going to be 20. And for the left, it's going to be 0. Okay, so that's how that works. Okay, so top, right, bottom, and left, followed by a semicolon. And then I'm also going to do a little bit of margin, specifically margin hyphen bottom. Okay, and I'm going to run out of line space here. There we go. There's the line break. And I'm going to go with 20 pixels. All right, good stuff. Go ahead and save up your work. If you want, you can go and refresh your browser to see what we get. We get something like this, right, which is great. So there's the height and the width and the background color and so on. But the menu items themselves are not really happening here. So what we'll do is we'll get our menu items behaving in the next exercise. Just sit tight and I'll show you how to convert your bulleted list into a horizontal navigation menu. All right, so we have the first part of the main navigation menu created, which is the nav itself. Now for the actual menu items. Now, there's some really cool things that we can do here. Let me flip back over to my code just for a second. As a matter of fact, my HTML code, all right? Now, if I look at my HTML code, what we have here are boxes inside boxes or containers inside containers. So in other words, I have a nav container, and then inside that nav container, I have an unordered list container, the UL, and then inside the UL, I have list items, okay? So what I can do is I can make use of this structure that we have here, containers inside containers, to help me control these various containers via CSS. Okay, now if you have no idea what the heck I just said, what I mean is that we can make use of what's referred to as a compound rule. Okay, think of conditional formatting. If this object appears inside that object, then make it look like this. Okay, if you've ever done conditional formatting inside some of your other applications. So what I want to do here is I want to say, if a list item happens to appear inside a nav element, then do XYZ to it. So here's what I mean. I'm going to flip over to styles.css, and just beneath my nav element there that I went and set up there, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, all right, if I have a nav that contains a list item, just like this, so nav space li, then I want to do some stuff to it. So it's pretty cool. This is called a compound rule, and you can use these in all kinds of different scenarios. Pretty cool stuff. Now, the thing that I want to do to my list items, if they should happen to appear inside a nav element, is actually really, really simple. I'm going to say display. If I could spell display, there we go, full colon space, and then inline. If I have a list of items inside a navigation element or a nav element, then make them appear inline. All that means is make them appear horizontally. Okay? Go ahead and save up your style sheet and flip back over to your browser and refresh, and voila, instant navigation menu, just like that. Okay? So in other words, the conditions that I specified were met. I do indeed have list items inside a nav element, so they all take on the instructions that the CSS is telling them to take on. All right, now one thing that I want to do just to finish this off before we move along here is all of these items are kind of jammed together, and I need to do a little bit more formatting in terms of, straightening these guys out. But what I want to do for now is I just want to space them apart a little bit. And how I'm going to do that is I'm going to use some HTML. Okay, so I'm going to flip back over to my code, back into index.html, and here's what I'm going to do, and I meant to do this earlier on, but we'll do it now, is after each of my list items, after the closing of the hyperlink, but before the closing of the list item, I'm going to do the following. I'm going to drop my cursor right in there, and I'm going to type in space, vertical pipe, space. Okay, now your vertical pipe is the same as your backslash key, way over on the right-hand side of your keyboard. And I'm going to insert this after each of my menu items. Okay, so I'm going to grab what I've typed in here and I'll copy it. And I'm going to drop it inside the exact same spot for each of my list items after the anchor, after the hyperlink, but before the list item closes, like so. Okay, all the way through the entire nav menu. And that's going to space things apart for me, at least on a temporary basis. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and save up my work and back to the browser and refresh. There we go. Something like that is just fine for now. It's not perfect, but I think for our purposes for now, before we really kick it into high gear with formatting, I think this will do just fine. All right, good stuff. Now, there's our navigation menu out of the way so we can move on to the rest of our layout. Okay, next, let's go after our slideshow. That's the next item, of course, inside our layout. Now, for the slideshow, what I did is I snagged the dimensions of the slideshow right out of our Illustrator wireframe and our Photoshop design. So we're going to set up this slideshow container inside the CSS to be exactly the same. Okay, so it's going to be 840 pixels in width by 300 pixels in height. So let's go and set this up here. I'm going to head all the way back to the code here, my external style sheet, all the way back here. The high resolution media query, of course, underneath my navigation menu there. I hope you like that trick, by the way. And here we go. This is going to be number sign slideshow. Okay, now I want to explain why if I head back to my HTML just for a quick moment. Remember, this is how we set this guy up to be an ID selector that's going to be controlling a div. Okay, so this is how we're gonna pull this off here. So we're gonna go number sign slideshow just like so, and then for his properties here inside his squiggly brackets, well, let's set up the dimensions that I just mentioned a moment ago. So let's go width and then 840 pixels, and we'll go height. Full colon space, and we said 300 pixels. Okay, there we go. And let's see. The other thing that I want to do, this is kind of a cool trick, is the slideshow itself should be centered inside the layout, right? If I once again refer back to the Photoshop design or the Photoshop layout, he's centered inside the overall width of the layout, right? So earlier on, you saw how we could center the overall layout via the master, right? Well, we can do the exact same thing for objects that appear inside the master, like the slideshow. And if you're not sure exactly how to do that or you don't remember it was just margin full colon space and then 0 and auto. So that's, again, a pretty cool technique, and it's cool that we can apply it to something that's sitting inside the master, like the slideshow. So a good trick to know. All right, so there we go. That's that. The only other thing that I want to do is I want to throw on a temporary background just so we can see this guy. And let's see, I'm just going to go RGB, so background, full colon space, and then RGB. And the RGB color values that I'm going to use, again, are just going to be sort of that mid-gray color, the same gray that we used on our header, like so. All right, good stuff. That should do it for the slideshow for now. Go ahead and save up your external style sheet and head back to your browser and refresh, and voila, there's our slideshow. Okay, of course, with the dimensions there and the background color, notice also he's centered inside the overall layout, which is great. So if you want, you could try scaling your browser window larger and smaller, and you'll see that this guy indeed centers inside the layout. Don't scale your browser window down too far because you'll break into the next media query. But in any regard, there we go. There's our slideshow. Next up, we have our 3 content boxes. Okay, our content boxes, our 3 content boxes. Now, this is going to give me another opportunity to show you some neat tricks here. First of all, let's just get a quick refresher on how we structured the 3 content boxes. If I head back to my HTML document for a moment, remember that the 3 content boxes, well, of course they contain the placeholder paragraph, but the content box itself is a div which is under the control of a class rule called content box. Okay, and there's 3 of them. So in other words, what's cool about this is we only need to create one CSS rule called content box, and he's going to be reused 3 times inside the layout. Okay, pretty cool stuff. So let's go and get the job done. I'm going to head back to my external style sheet, of course, into the high resolution media query, and let's get started with our content box. So this guy's a class rule. Class rules are always preceded by a period. Okay, so I'm going to go dot content box, just like so. Okay, squiggly brackets, there we are. And let's go and set up the dimensions. Again, I'm pulling this out of the layout that we've already created. So the width is going to be 285 pixels, like so. There we go. Let me just throw in an extra space in there. There we go. something like that. So width 285 pixels. The background, again, I'm just going to throw in a quick temporary background color for this guy, 200, 200, and 200, of course, RGB color values. Okay. Now, the other thing that I want to have happen is, and maybe I should save this for a moment. Actually, I think I will. I'm going to make you wait just for a second here. I'm going to throw in a few extra properties here. I'm going to go padding. So don't forget, this is the space on the inside of the object, and I'm going to use a padding value of 10 pixels. And my margin, I'm going to go margin full colon space, and then I'm going to go top 0, right is going to be 0, the bottom is going to be 10 pixels, and the left-hand side is going to be 10 pixels as well, something like this. Now, again, I'm making you wait on something here. I'm going to go and save up my work and head back to the browser for a second and refresh. This is what we wind up with, okay? Our 3 content boxes, 285 pixels in width, temporary background color, some spacing, and so on. But we don't want them stacked on top of one another. We want them sitting all on the same line, of course, right? Horizontally across our layout. Now, to pull this off in CSS, we need to make use of something called floating. So here's what I'm going to do back inside my external style sheet. Inside my content box rule is I'm going to type out float. Now, I don't know if you've ever worked with floating before inside CSS. It's pretty cool. I'm going to go float full colon space left. So I want all of my objects to float to the left. Go ahead and save up your work, and then back over to your browser and refresh. And this is what we get. All of our containers now sitting all horizontally across the layout. Perfect. Awesome stuff. The only other thing I think I'll do is I think I will throw a little bit of margin on top of these guys. I set the margin top to 0, but I think I'm going to maybe increase that. Maybe I'll go margin top 10. So make sure you're grabbing the first value for your margin there, by the way. And let's go 10 pixels like so. There we go, something like that, just to space things apart a little bit. So this is very, very cool. Again, I had the opportunity to show you some cool stuff here, using one rule to create 3 objects that look identical inside the layout. And of course, the floating's in there as well. And we have some additional properties, of course, the margin, the padding, and so on. So there's our content boxes out of the way. We are rapidly moving through this process here of getting the structure formatted. We now have the news feed, and then after the news feed, of course, the footer down at the bottom. Okay, the news feed here, or the article section of the layout, however you want to refer to it. Let me give you a quick refresher in terms of how we set up the HTML structure for this area of our layout. Give me just a moment here. I'm going to head back to index.html. Don't forget that we have 4 of these guys, first of all, and they're all set up exactly the same way. They're all set up using an HTML5 element called article. They are all contained inside a div that's under the control of a class called news. And then, of course, the title is an H2, and the paragraph there, the placeholder text, is contained inside an HTML paragraph. So all I want to do here in this exercise is I want to get the article itself under the control of CSS, as well as the news div. Okay, I'm really not too concerned about the H2, the heading 2, or the paragraph just yet. So let's see, I'm going to head back to the external style sheet. As you can see, the high resolution media query is getting filled in nicely here with all of the rules that we're creating. We've got to go and create 2 more here. Okay, so give yourself a little bit of space. Maybe what I'll do is I'll give myself a lot more space just so you can see exactly what I'm doing here. And I'm going to start things off with the article. Okay, so again, this is an HTML element, so I'm just going to type in the name of that element. And let's see, I'm going to throw on some width onto this guy. Width of 940 pixels, like so. Okay, and I want to put a little bit of space on his left-hand side, so I'm going to go margin hyphen left, and I'm going to say 10 pixels. Okay, that's it. Now, you can save your work and go and refresh your browser if you want. I'm going to keep moving here, though. I'm going to go and create the news class rule as well, which is, of course, controlling that div, which we saw just a moment ago. Okay, so I'm going to go .news and then throw in my squiggly brackets there. And all I want to do is I want to put a little bit of spacing below my news divs. So I'm going to say margin hyphen bottom, full colon space, and I'll say 20 pixels. That's all I'm after here. All right, go ahead and save up your work. And I'm going to head back over to the browser and refresh. And there we go. Just a little bit of spacing, a little bit of formatting is all that's happening here inside the news feed or the article area. Okay, so pretty simple stuff. There we go. Good stuff. Now, to finish things off, the footer. Okay, the wireframe layout here is really coming together nicely. We only have the footer left for the high-resolution wireframe, at least. And you know what? The footer is going to be crazy easy because it's practically finished. If I scroll all the way down to the bottom, you can see everything's displaying in line. Why is everything displaying in line? Any ideas? Any guesses? How come I don't have a vertical bulleted list like we saw earlier? Well, don't forget, if I flip back over to the external style sheet, we created a compound rule that said, hey, if you've got a list item and that list item appears inside a nav, then make sure that those elements display inline. So whether they're being contained inside a nav itself or inside a nav that's inside a footer, which is exactly what we have going on inside the HTML. If I scroll all the way down, remember we had copied and pasted the whole shebang into the footer area, okay? So, as I say, the footer is practically finished. The only issue that I have is I'm getting some extra white space down beneath the footer, and that's an easy fix to get rid of. I'm going to head back to the external style sheet here into the high-resolution media query, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to type in footer. Let's do a compound rule here. I'm going to go footer nav, okay? So if I have a navigation element inside a footer, all right? And again, think of that conditional formatting if you like. And all I'm going to do for this guy is I'm going to say, all right, margin hyphen bottom, full colon space, nothing, 0. Don't put any space beneath this guy. Save up your work, head back to your browser and refresh. And sure enough, that collapses down that extra additional white space beneath the footer. Okay? All right, there we go. There's our high resolution rough layout, wireframe layout complete. Now, we have to do the same for the medium resolution and also for the low resolution, but I think that's going to go pretty quick because we've set it up once here already, and then, of course, we can move on to actually getting some colors in here, some font formatting, and, of course, graphics as well. All right, the wireframing for the high-resolution layout is complete. So we're ready to move on to the next device, the medium resolution wireframe. And of course, this will make use of our medium resolution media query as well. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take my browser and I'm going to scale his width down until I see the green background, something like this. Now you can scale yours down as narrow as you like, so long as you don't go into the third media query, the low resolution. So somewhere in here is fine, or a little bit wider is fine, whatever you like. It's really entirely up to you, okay? So long as you're getting this green background, because that tells us that we're inside the medium resolution media query. Now, let's go and set this guy's wireframing up. So I'm going to flip back over to my external style sheet. For the time being, we are done with the high resolution media query. So I'm going to make sure that I'm inside the medium resolution media query. Now, just a quick aside, this can start to get a little bit confusing because we're really dealing with 3 sets of CSS rules, 3 lists of CSS rules. So you really want to make sure that you're inside the correct list before you start working away. So I'm going to make sure that I'm inside my medium resolution media query, of course, as I just mentioned. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to do something about that green background. So I'm going to change him to an RGB color value. I'm going to use my 244, 244, 244, like so. And if you want, of course, you can go and preview that. There we go. So we get this light gray background here, which is nice, much more pleasing on the eye than that bright green. All right, the other thing that I want to do here before we go any further is I want to get the master ID selector set up, just like we did for the high resolution layout, okay? So I'm still inside, of course, the medium resolution media query. As a matter of fact, here's what I'm going to do to make this super easy for you to follow along. Forget everything else you see on screen except for where I am right now. There we go. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in my number sign and then master, okay, or hash mark master, all right? Now, I'm going to change this up a little bit. For the high resolution, we set a fixed width of 960 pixels. This time, I'm going to set a scaling width of 95%, okay? So what I'm saying is that I want my overall layout to be 95% of the overall device's width, okay? Whatever that width might be. So long as it falls, of course, between 481 pixels and 1023. So there we go. Don't forget your closing semicolon on the end there. And let's see, I want to center this guy inside the medium resolution device as well. So I'm going to use the good old margin zero auto trick, okay, which we've seen a couple of times already. I'm going to stick a border on this guy once again. So border 1 pixel, solid, and I'll set my border to black using RGB color values 0, 0, and 0. Okay. And let's see, I think that should just about do it. Let's do a quick background on this guy as well. Background RGB, and let's see, I'm going to go 255, 255, 255 for white. Okay, there we go. Go ahead and save up your work and head over to your browser and refresh. Remember, Controller Command R on your keyboard, or you can use your refresh icon or button way up on your toolbar. So this is how things are looking so far. So I can see the different background colors there, the light gray versus the white. I can see the frame for the master. And once again, this is a scaling width, right? So he's going to be 95% of the medium resolution device's overall width, okay? Which is quite different from what we did earlier on the fixed 960 pixel width. So it's kind of cool. You can change it up here. All right, good stuff. Now let's go after the header and then, of course, the main navigation menu and the rest of the medium resolution layout. So as always, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my top-down approach. So we'll go after the header next and then, of course, into the navigation menu and so on. So I'm going to change things up a little bit here with the header. If I flip back over to my code here, again, I got to remind you here, the medium resolution media query. What I'm going to do is, well, I'm going to get myself set up for the header. Again, it's an HTML5 element, so I'm just typing in header, just like we've seen already. And what I'm going to do here, I'm going to change it up as I say. I'm not going to specify a width, which means that the header is going to fill the entire width of the master, which don't forget is 95%. So said another way, and I hope this doesn't scramble your brain, but said another way, the header is going to be 100% of 95%. I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, just sit tight and follow along and all will be crystal clear in just a moment. So for the header, here's what I'm going to do. I'm simply going to skip ahead and set a height on this fella of 130 pixels, like so, okay? And I'm also going to go ahead and set a background RGB values, of course, as always. This time we'll do 200, 200, 200, like that. So that's it. That's all we need to do here for the header. And when I save the external style sheet and head back over to my browser and refresh, there we go. There's the header in place for us. This is what I mean. So he's spanning right across the entire width of that master div by default. So we didn't have to set the width. He's always going to be 100% of whatever the master is, which of course is 95%. Okay? So that's how that's functioning. That's how that's working. Hopefully no big deal. Now we have our main navigation menu next. Now, as far as the main navigation menu goes, you've seen this once already. So you already know that we're actually going to be adjusting two things. We're going to be adjusting the nav element itself, and then, of course, the menu items themselves, right? So two different elements. Some of the settings are going to be a little bit different in terms of setting up the nav element, but setting up the menu items themselves to appear horizontal rather than vertical is going to be exactly the same as you saw earlier. Okay, so let's go to work here inside our external style sheet inside, of course, the medium resolution media query. So I'm going to start things off by setting up my nav. Okay, just like the header, it's an HTML5 element, so we're just typing in nav. And I'm going to set his background first, so that's going to be black just as it was before. So background full colon space RGB, and then we're going to go 0, 0, 0, okay, for solid black. And let's see, I'm going to set a padding value. Now, I should mention too, I'm going to be using some different settings, as I say. You may want to use some alternate settings versus what I'm using. I fiddled around a little bit and wound up with some settings that I think work well for me, but again, you're completely free to use your own settings if you want. So, for instance, I'm going to set a padding value of 10 pixels. So what this means is 10 pixels of space all the way around all 4 sides on the inside of the navigation menu. Once again, those are that's the number that I wound up with myself. You're welcome to use different numbers if you like. Now, I'm also going to set a margin bottom value of 20 pixels, something like this. Now, you're welcome to go and refresh your browser if you like. That's perfectly fine. I want to keep moving, though. I'm going to get the second item set up. This is our conditional formatting. Remember, we talked about this earlier on. So what I'm going to say, once again, just like we did before, is if a list item, an LI, happens to appear inside a nav, then I want to do some stuff to it. Like what? Well, I want it to display inline. That's all I want it to do for now, anyway. So there we go. Go ahead and save up your work. And now I'm going to go and refresh my browser. And there we go. We wind up with something like this. Okay, so I said that I wanted 10 pixels of space above and below, and also on the left-hand side, and also way over on the right-hand side. Now, what's interesting to note, and I'm sure you're going to find this on your side as well, is when I start scaling, I'll get to a point where the main menu is going to wind up breaking onto a second line while I'm still inside the low-resolution device. Okay, so that's to be expected. I was anticipating that, right? It's not really realistic to think that this main navigation menu is going to always reside on a single line. I suppose I could do that if I really wanted to, but I mean, that text would be tiny, right? We'd have to set it up so that the text shrunk, which is no good for, a medium resolution or a tablet device, right? So this is how it's going to look for now. Later on, we'll throw in some additional formatting to maybe increase the font size and make some adjustments and maybe space apart the text and so on. But this is what we wind up with so far. All right, our slideshow is next. Once again, my settings are going to change a little bit from the high resolution versus, of course, here, the medium resolution. And again, I'm going to be using some different settings. You're welcome to go and use your own if you wish. You're more than welcome to fiddle around with these settings. All right, once again, I'm going to head over to the external style sheet. This time, it's going to be #sign slideshow. All right, and I have to remind you here, if you're ever in doubt, if you're sitting here going, all right, I want to get that slideshow under control, but I don't remember how it was set up or I don't know what to do, that's why we have the HTML file kicking around, right? If I scroll all the way up, there's our slideshow right there. Okay, and I go, oh, yeah, right, I set up the slideshow to control a div, and it's an ID selector, right? And of course, ID selectors are always preceded by a #sign or a hash mark. Okay, so just keep your HTML file kind of kicking around just for reference, just in case you ever need to go back. All right, so as far as the slideshow is concerned, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to set a width here. Now, what I'm going to do, this is actually pretty cool, is, well, with the high resolution, we had a fixed width and height for the slideshow, if you'll recall. And I'm going from memory. Actually, I shouldn't go from memory. If I scroll down to the high resolution, where's our slideshow? There he is. 840 pixels by 300 pixels. Okay, I'm sure you remember that. And at the time, I mentioned that I had pulled those values out of the Photoshop file. So that's great, but it's going to change here with the medium resolution because I'm setting the medium resolution layout to scale, right? We've already talked about that, 95%. So I'm going to set it up so that the slideshow scales as well. Pretty cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set his width to a percentage, and I'm going to go with 90% myself. Okay, something like this. All right? All right, now the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set a height. Now the height that I'm going to use is going to be a fixed value, 300 pixels. So you can mix and match your scaling and your fixed units if you want for width and for height, as I've done here. All right, what else am I going to do here? Well, let's make sure to center this guy inside the layout as well. So I'm going to go margin, okay? Now, instead of doing the 0 auto, which we've done, if I can get auto in there, there we go, something like that. Now, instead of doing that, that's what I was saying, what I'm going to do is instead of using 0 for top and bottom, I'm going to use 10 pixels for top and bottom. Okay, so I want 10 pixels of space above and below the slideshow. And of course, I want the browser or the object itself to figure out how much space should be on the left and right sides. Okay, so sorry, that was a little bit confusing. There we go. That's looking good. The other thing that I'm going to do is I want to set a background on this guy. Okay, once again, a temporary wireframe background of 200, 200, and 200. Okay, just that gray background. And how about a border? Okay, so I'm going to go border, 1 pixel, solid, and let's just make this a black border, 0, 0, 0. Okay, there we go. Go ahead and save up your work, and let's check out our slideshow over inside our browser. Give it the good old refresh, Controller Command R on your keyboard, and there's our slideshow. Okay, now here's the cool thing about the slideshow. So once again, the height is fixed. Okay, so the height's not going to change, but the width is set to 90%. Okay, so the width of this guy is always going to be 90% of the overall width. So 90% of 95% because the master is 95%, right? So this guy could scale out nice and wide like this, something like this, or he could collapse all the way down, maybe something like that, okay, before breaking into that third media query. Okay, so pretty cool techniques, pretty cool tricks to pull that off. And of course, I have the 10 pixels of space above this guy and below this guy, and auto spacing on the left, and of course, over on the right as well. All right, what do we have next inside our medium resolution layout? Well, it would be our 3 content boxes that we have, of course, beneath the slideshow. Now, just for your reference, I've gone and opened up the medium resolution design inside Photoshop. Okay, again, just for a reference, and you're welcome to go and open up yours as well on your side if you like. So, of course, there's the slideshow, and then if I pan down, don't forget we had decided to set these guys up so that they're stacked on top of one another. Okay, like so, rather than being placed horizontally across the layout as they are inside the high resolution design. Okay, so that's what we're after. So this should actually be fairly straightforward. Let's go after these guys. I'm going to head back over to my external style sheet. Okay, just beneath my slideshow, I want to go and create a new rule. Now, my skill testing question for you: what is the name of the rule that I want to go and create? If you're thinking dot content box, you're absolutely right. It's a class rule, so it's preceded by a period, and we called this guy content box. Okay, if you're not sure, if you're a little fuzzy, head back to your HTML file and look for these guys. They're in there. We already coded them in there. All right, good stuff. So let's go and throw in our curly brackets there, our squiggly brackets, and let's get these guys done. I'm going to go background, and let's see, we'll throw in our temporary RGB 200, 200, 200 wireframe background. There we go. And let's see, I'm going to use a little bit of padding on these guys once again. So padding, and then I'm going to go 10 pixels. So that's 10 pixels all the way around all 4 sides on the inside, right? And I want some spacing on the bottom of these guys. So I'm going to go margin hyphen bottom. There we are. And let's go 10 pixels. Okay. That should do it for us. Let's see what we get over inside our browser. Go ahead and save up your work and head back to your browser and give it the good old refresh, Controller Command R, and there we go, just like that. So they don't look exactly like they do over inside Photoshop, of course. There's no graphics, there's no formatting, no design on top of them just yet, but they're structurally there, and that's what we're after. Okay, so good stuff. And don't forget, because we set these guys up to be class rules, we set up one content box, and we actually wind up setting up all 3 all in one shot. Okay, the medium resolution wireframe is really coming together here nicely. We're actually winding down. We only have the news feed and, once again, that minor change on the footer, and then this media query is complete, which is great. So let's go after the news feed, the list of articles there, whatever you want to call it. Just like we did with the high resolution, what I'm going to do for these guys is I'm going to be defining two separate areas, if you will. So the article itself and then the news class, okay? Now, once again, if you would like a quick refresher on the structure here, head to your HTML file and look for your news feed area. And there's our article, of course, and there's the news div, which is under the control, of course, of a class rule called news, okay? So those are the two guys that I'm going to go and get under control here, at least for now, inside the external style sheet. So once again, I think what I'll do is I will start things off with article, okay, like so. And I'm going to set this guy's width also to a scaling width, just as we've done a couple of times already here. I'm going to go 95%, okay? You're welcome to monkey with this a little bit if you want. And I'm going to put a little bit of space over on his left-hand side, so margin hyphen left, all right? And I'm going to go 10 pixels. Wonderful. All right, now how about the class called news? Let's go after this guy. Pretty much the same as we saw earlier with the high resolution. So I'm going to put some space beneath these guys. So margin hyphen bottom, and I'm going to go with 20 pixels. That's it. That's all we need to do for our article area or our news feed. Go ahead and check it out inside your browser. There we go. So once again, just a little bit of minor spacing going on there. Okay, and it's going to be flexible, of course, because we set the width to 95%. So we're getting this sort of action when we scale the browser window. Okay? All right, there we go. We only have the footer left, and then we can move on. We're down to the footer for our medium resolution media query. Now, you know, at the end of the previous exercise, when I said, all right, we just have the footer left, I realized that we didn't include the same spacing inside the footer area as we did for the main navigation area way up towards the top, this extra space that we have there. Do you remember how we did that? I want to make sure that they're both exactly the same. So I want to make sure that both are set up in exactly the same way. So this is actually a bit of a divergence. We're going to go and fix the CSS or set up the CSS for the footer in just a moment. If I head back to my HTML, do you remember we had gone and thrown in these guys here? So the space and then the vertical pipe and then space. We did that for the main navigation menu, but we didn't do it for the footer. So what I'm going to do, I hope this is all right with you, is I'm going to grab the main navigation menu. This is in the HTML file, of course. And I'm going to copy it, Control or Command C, and then I'll simply paste it down inside the footer. Okay, so just duplicating out that extra spacing, okay? Again, I want to make sure that they're both identical, they're both uniform. So if I go and refresh my browser here, there's that extra spacing in there, which is what I want, okay? All right, good stuff. Perhaps a minor thing, but, you know, I want to make sure everything's nice and hunky-dory here for us. Now, the issue that you and I need to fix is this extra gap of space that we're getting beneath the footer. And we saw this earlier on with the high-resolution design or high-resolution wireframe, as I'm sure you recall. Do you remember how we fixed it? That's the big question. I'm sure you remember doing it, but do you remember how we did it? Well, here we go. I'm going to head to my external style sheet into the medium resolution media query, of course, and I'm going to go footer nav. So once again, this is a compound rule, right? We've seen these guys a couple of times. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to say, all right, any space on the bottom, I want to remove it. So I'm going to say margin bottom, nothing, 0. Okay, followed by the semicolon there, of course. All right, go ahead and save up your work and head back to your browser and refresh. And there we go. Now that extra gap of space is toast, gone. Okay, wonderful. There it is. All right, so there's the medium resolution wireframe complete. It looks great. So there we are. Okay, so we only have one more wireframe to go, which is going to be, of course, the low resolution. So if you scale your browser window down and you see the blue background, this is our low resolution, or this would be perhaps for a handheld device, something like this. So let's get to work on the low resolution wireframe. Well, we're making some great headway. Here's, of course, the high-resolution media query, or device, if you will. And you and I just finished working on the medium-resolution device, this guy here, which looks great. So you can see instantly the layout snaps, the layout changes as soon as we break into that next media query down, of course, right? Or up, something like this. If I get this guy scaled back out, there we go. There's our high resolution. So, of course, now we want to work on the third and final guy, this guy, the low resolution layout or the low resolution media query. So in this exercise, let's get ourselves set up. And then, of course, we will do the good old top-down routine. I hope that's all right with you. And I think this is going to go pretty smoothly, pretty quickly. There's not a whole lot to work on here. This is the external style sheet, of course. Now, again, I really got to stress that you got to make sure that you're in the right spot. Make sure you're in your low resolution media query between his curly brackets. Okay, so once again, maybe what I'll do is give myself tons of white space here, out of sight, out of mind. Let's pretend that we don't have any other media queries here. We're just working on this low resolution guy here. And let's see, what I'll do is I'll set my background color first for this guy. So once again, I'm going to use my RGB color values here. I'm going to go 244, 244, 244. There we go. And, while we're at it, I'm going to do this all in one shot here. Let's go and set up our master as well. Okay, so we know all about the master. We've set 2 of them up already, so this is all old news here. What I'm going to do is, well, you saw previously that the medium resolution's master was going to scale, right? And the high resolution was a fixed width. I'm going to go with a scaling width once again. As a matter of fact, I'm going to go 95%, just like the medium resolution, okay? But I still want them to center, okay? So I'm going to go margin full colon space, and I'll do the zero auto technique that we've learned about. And let's see, let's throw a border onto this guy, 1 pixel, solid. And let's make that border black, so RGB 0, 0, and 0. Okay, don't forget your semicolon on the end there. And then let's throw in a background as well of white. So RGB, and then of course in my parentheses, in my brackets there, 255, 255, and 255. Finishing off with the semicolon, of course. All right, very good. Go ahead and save up your external style sheet. Head back over to your browser. Give me a second. I'm just going to hide everything except for my browser and refresh Controller Command R. And there we go. This is our low resolution wireframe, of course, the initial view anyway of the low resolution. So there we go. There's the breaking between, for example, the medium and the low. Or if you wanted to, you could scale all the way up to the high and then medium and then low to get an idea of how this is going to function for you. Okay, so this hopefully is really starting to come together in your head. We have 3 completely separate layouts depending on the device that's being used. The layout, the appropriate layout, I should say, is going to be served up. Okay, and it's all based on media queries. Pretty cool to actually see it in action, though, visually. All right, so let's get started on the header and, of course, the main navigation menu for our low-resolution wireframe. Okay, the low-resolution header. Now, I propose that we crank out the header and also the main navigation menu all at once in this exercise. How does that sound? We've already done it twice, so hopefully by now you're pretty comfortable with the process. You're pretty comfortable with what we need to do. So hopefully, I think this is possible. I think we can pull this off. So I'm going to head back over to the external style sheet. Of course, a gentle reminder, making sure that I'm inside the low resolution media query. And let's see, I'm going to start off with header. He's an HTML element, so I just need to type in his name. I'm not going to set a width on this guy, just like we did earlier, right? So I'm not going to bother with a width. I'm going to jump right into his height of 130 pixels. And the only other thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to set a background for this guy. And I'm going to use 200, 200, 200. Okay, that's it for the header. Easy stuff, no big deal. Now, you can save your external style sheet if you want, and you can head back to your browser and refresh and play around with scaling it and all that fun stuff. I'm going to keep moving, though. I want to crank out the navigation menu and also the list items inside the nav element, the navigation menu as well. Okay, so I hope that's all right with you. I'm going to keep going here. So this is going to be nav, right? And let's see. Let's set that background, the solid black background, which is going to be 0, 0, and 0. Okay, and I hope you don't mind me moving a little bit faster now. I'm going to use a padding value of 10 pixels all the way around all four sides. And I'm also going to throw in some margin. There we go. Bottom of 20 pixels. Okay, again, you're welcome to fiddle around with your own settings. Okay, more than welcome to do that. And then we're going to go for the good old compound rule here. So nav li for the list items inside the nav menu. Okay, and that's just going to be, for now anyway, display inline. Okay, that's it. That's all we need to worry about here for this exercise. Okay, so the header, the nav, and then of course the list items inside the nav, the main navigation menu. Let's head back to the browser and refresh Controller Command R, and this is what we should wind up with. Okay? Now, once again, we saw this earlier on. Once again, our main navigation menu is going to break onto multiple lines. Okay, so that's just something that we have to expect is going to happen because we have such a narrow width that's happening here. So in just a little bit, we'll throw some formatting in here to kind of clean this up and perhaps make it a little bit easier to read. You got to think about usability and, legibility and things like that. The other thing, too, is you may have noticed this, that we have this massive gap of space here over on the left-hand side of the nav menu. So we're going to fix that up too. I'm going to show you a trick for cleaning that up as well. We also get that, by the way, in the medium resolution layout, this sort of big, massive gap of space there on the left-hand side. So we'll clean that up. Okay. So there we go. There's our header all in one shot. Of course, not setting a width for that guy. So he fills the entire master, which is great. And the nav and the nav list items, which is wonderful. There's no slideshow, so we can jump right into our 3 content boxes. Okay, on to the 3 content boxes. Now, before we get to the 3 content boxes, I do want to address the slideshow somewhat, if you will. I want to make sure that he definitely will not display in a low resolution device at all. Okay, so if I crank this wider, of course, he appears for the medium resolution, drop him down to the low resolution, and he's not showing up. Now, the reason why he's not showing up right now is if I head back to my external style sheet into the low resolution media query, we haven't defined slideshow. Okay, so that's why he's not showing up. But I really want to make sure that he's not going to show up. So I'm going to take a somewhat preemptive measure here to make sure that he doesn't show up. I'm going to go and define him. Okay, so hash mark or number sign slideshow. Okay, and then inside his curly brackets, his squiggly brackets, I'm going to say display. There we go. And I'm going to say, let me make sure I get display in there correctly. There we go. Display none. Just to make sure that he will not appear inside the low resolution device. Now, onward to content boxes. Now, as far as the content boxes go, once again, what I've done for us here over inside Photoshop is I opened up our low resolution design, once again as a reference. This is eventually how it's going to look. And just like our tablet layout, these 3 guys are going to stack on top of one another vertically. So we're going to go and set that up inside the external style sheet. So once again, this guy's a class rule. We know this from earlier on. He's a class rule called content box. Okay, and this one rule is going to control all 3 content boxes. Okay, which we already know. And I'm going to go and throw in the wireframe background color 200, 200, 200. Okay, followed by a semicolon. And then I'm going to throw some padding onto this guy, 10 pixels all the way around all 4 sides, and some margin on the bottom as well. Okay, something like this. 10 pixels, how's that? And that's it. That's all I'm after here for this guy. Okay, let's head back over to the browser and refresh, and there we go. Something like this is what we wind up with. Okay, so the 3 content boxes, of course, all stacking on top of one another with the appropriate spacing both inside and outside the 3 content boxes, which is great. So this is where it gets fun. You start scaling these browser windows, wider and narrower to see your layout actually adjust, actually change depending on the resolution, or in our case at least, the width of our previewing browser, which is great. Okay, there we go. There's the content boxes. I'm going to keep moving here. I'm going to head down now to our newsfeed area, our article area. We've done this twice already, so I think this is going to go pretty quickly.